Good evening and welcome to the Jinn and Tonic Show on Friday, the 3rd of November. We don't have too many viewers yet, and that may be because of the daylight saving that has changed. So we are starting either an hour earlier or an hour later. I always get confused. I can't remember. But a good evening to my co-panelists, Abu and Stop Spamming.
Good evening.
Can you correct me now? Which are we? Are we an hour ahead now or an hour back? I can't always remember.
I don't know. As I said,
in summer it would be 8 o'clock now.
Yeah, exactly.
It is 8 o'clock now. On my side.
In the UK, it's now 9 o'clock.
In the UK, it's 8 o'clock now.
Oh, in the UK, it's 8 o'clock. Sorry, so it would be 7 o'clock.
Okay, so we are an hour later then, is it?
No, earlier.
Earlier. There you go. See, I was confused.
It's actually quite easy. I used to have the same thing. Yeah. What you need to do is the purpose of this was to get the daylight saving so that no, hang on, I got it wrong. I got it exactly wrong. Because it's supposed to be 1 hour late. No, I got it right. It's supposed to be 1 hour later in summer so that it's still daylight. So in summer, if it's 9 o'clock, then it's supposed to be 10 o'clock so that you have daylight at 10 o'clock, which you don't have if you were to have it 9 o'clock. So if we move it back, we're going from 10 to 9. So we went from 8 to 7.
Oh, you know why? This thing, hang on a moment, I know why. I may not have this set as a public. Please don't tell me that's the case. Let me just check something here quickly. I've got a sneaking suspicion.
That would explain it.
That's unlisted. Can you believe it? Adam and Eve it. 1 second for me here. How did I miss that?
You want to set this up new?
I don't know why I did that. No, I should be able to just edit it here and set it to public. Here we go. Public, save changes, publish. And it should now have it as public. Just refresh. There we go. Yeah. Okay. That was a oversight there. Right. So good evening again. For now, setting it to public. We'll probably get some viewers in shortly. So obviously what we're going to be chatting about, as per the title, is it's been 500 years to the day, or to the year, should I say, to the year since the Christian Reformation, and Abu will share some more information on that shortly. And what we'll discuss initially in the beginning of the show is, will there be an Islamic Reformation of some kind, and what might that look like, and is that a good thing or not? And so we will be covering that very shortly. But what we do,
I mean, it was to the day in Tuesday. Stop Spamming was on my channel, and Ike too. We're talking about that. But it's kind of cool, you know, to think like exactly 500 years ago, like this dude pinned these 95 theses on the church door.
Good. Well, I want you to tell everybody about that in a moment.
Okay.
But before we do that, as always, our wonderful and entertaining comments. And here's a regular commenter now on my channel, and this fella again. So this guy basically said something I don't remember. I've got the second part of this because the first part I did last week. So I told him he had unsubstantiated claims. And so his reply is, unsubstantiated claims says you and your panelists that talk out of ignorance, who put on their own spin on verses. The title of your poxy show, title of your poxy show is Islam taken out of context. Well, you fools clearly prove that on your own show. Rob, you're one biased and disingenuous human, or ape, correction. Well, yes, in a sense, we all are apes.
We are all, yeah, of course.
Or a family of apes, yeah. One day I will come on your foolish show and put you pensioners to bed. Well, you've probably got a couple of years left in this world, so I suppose have fun with it while it lasts. Also, Rob, I know deep down that you have been amazed by the verses of the Holy Book. I have been amazed by its ignorance and human stupidity. Yes, I am. I am constantly amazed, and the people believe it, by the way. And most definitely, it has crossed your mind that this book has to be from God. Yes, only if God is a complete bumbling fool. But just lying to yourself and kidding yourself by making up excuses just not to be live, because you can't let your stupid 1,000 subscriber, 1K subscribers, well, I got 2K, thank you very much, so please read again. Just drop the ignorance and be sincere, mostly to yourself, because you've read the verses deep down and you know that no man, I didn't get the rest, unfortunately, no man could possibly do something. And I replied, I'm patiently waiting for you to join the show and to put us to bed. I won't hold my breath. I'll wager you'll never join the show. And like I said, I do encourage you, I should have put in there, to continue posting your amusing comments. Yes, of course. I obviously, I'm denying it. This, by the way, is just another thing that presuppositionists say, not that this particular person would understand that most probably. But we're just denying it. We all know it. We're just fooling ourselves, or whatever the case is. But if your God doesn't know what's going on, can't accurately predict the future, acts like a human being, an ignorant one, then yes, that book could be from a God. But then the word God has got no meaning. It's not what most people mean by the word God. So I would say human. You want to use the word God, but then for me, God is synonymous with human, if that's what you want to claim, that the book is from a God, from somebody a human purporting to have heard something from a God. There's just too much, incorrect information and being unclear, etc., and which we'll talk about, I'm sure, a bit later.
Let me just go for a quick answer here from the chat. Hi guys, the Jinn and Tonic Show have received a strike because of this fool who came on for a couple of seconds, and we need to wait another, 2 weeks before it gets available again?
Yes, so the end of November we'll be available to host the show again on the Jinn and Tonic channel because of the strike we got for somebody trying to come on. Somebody gave the link out, and then we had trolls coming on. Hopefully that won't happen again, because we now have hopefully a way to control that, at least better. Good, moving on to the next one. Rob, you are so pathetic. You do your best to deny anything favors the Quran, but would you rather go with non-Muslim explanation? Try to get some self-esteem, but you would rather go with non-Muslim explanation. No, I'd rather go with what is true or likely true. And that just happens to often be a non-Muslim explanation, if not always.
But what is that? I don't understand this. You would rather go with non-Muslim explanation. What does that mean?
I do my best to deny anything that might be in the Quran that favors the Quran. Well, what actually favors the Quran? So what he's saying is basically that I will only go with a non-Muslim explanation for anything that the Quran purports to say that denies the Quran, in other words. So if anything favors the Quran, you
don't go with the Muslim. Okay, you are not you don't look at it as a Muslim, but as a non-Muslim. Is that what it is?
Yes, in a sense, yes. So a Muslim would say, hey, this and that favors the Quran, and a non-Muslim would say, no, it doesn't for X, Y, and Z reasons. And his claim is that I only go with what the non-Muslim explanation. No, I go with what is true or likely true, and that just happens to correspond with the non-Muslim explanation, funnily enough.
Try to get some self-esteem.
I don't know what self-esteem is. Yeah, so I think there's a bit of muddling of ideas and terms there, but anyway, according to him, I'm pathetic and need some self-esteem. So there you go. Moving on, you've got to love this stuff.
Because of the Quran.
Yes, because of course, if you don't agree with the Quran, then there must be something wrong with you, or whatever the case. It can't be the Quran, of course, because that's from the Word of God. So it must be us that are mistaken.
That's
if God was, yes, exactly. If God was well-intentioned towards us and had an important message to reveal, why would he? Oh, this is not a crazy comment, by the way, but a good question. If God was well-intentioned towards us and had an important message to reveal, why would he choose to relay the message to a peasant in a remote part of the world in a language that need experts to translate? His proof that the message is from Allah is the cryptic clues within it. This is supposed to be an all-powerful, all-knowing God, and the Quran is his best effort. It would be more impressive and trivially easy for God to convey his message to 1,000 people around the world in all the world's languages with the exact same message. If he threw in a few scientific formulas and maybe the cure for cancer, that would make atheists think. Yep. Quite right. Quite right. Yes. I mean, it's just trivial, isn't it? I mean, this, and that's why you and I and other people like this look at this and just, face palm and hold our heads in our hands sometimes. But maybe the whole idea was to make it as cryptic and difficult to understand as possible, so that it could survive for 1,400 years and we'd still be talking about it today. Because of course, if this had have happened as this person said, we would have been able to confirm or falsify this, probably hundreds, if not thousands, 1,000 years ago or more. So maybe
that's why I modified my reason or the level of evidence from the previous one to, I would like to see a Quran which is up to date, modern, and available in every single language, updated every single week.
Yeah, but then of course it's changing. They don't like change. It needs to be absolute and unchanging. And
well, that's my evidence. But this is exactly the downfall of the Quran, because they're not changing. And this is why the request to go back to the 7th century and try and live like in the 7th century and relive and revive this 7th century, this is exactly the reason why Islam is such a failure.
Yes, I agree with you. I've said it many times. You have, and other people have probably numerous times for years and years. If they drop the whole thing of, it's a book for all time, for all people, and they just suggested that the book was meant for the people of the 7th century, and we can take allegorical claims and messages, then we could have a more serious discussion, potentially, a bit like the Christians do to some degree, even though I don't agree with anything Christianity. But they've got a difference, as we talked about before the show started, which is, most modern Christians think that the Bible is inspired, written by men, but inspired by God, whereas Muslims say it was dictated by God. And so there's a fundamental difference. When it's dictated, then it's the word of God, whereas the Bible is the message of God interpreted by humans. And so Christians have got more latitude, or seemingly appear to have more latitude, although that brings its own problems, in interpreting, whereas Muslims can't. So that might be something that we cover when we talk more about, the Reformation, etc.
And I like the Christian God. Come on, he has the most righteous man that he saves out of Sodom and Gomorrah get drunk every night and have sex with his daughters. I mean, that's an inspiration.
Yes, and of course he's also blessed by offering his daughters to be raped instead of the strangers at his door.
What an inspiration.
Exactly, yes. All right, moving on. This was sent to me by Abu, I think it was. Maybe you can say the context of this, Abu. I'll just read it, and then maybe you can say which video or what the context was. All the earliest mosques point towards, this is a Muslim, so this was actually a question mark. All the earliest mosques point towards Petra for the first 100 years. This fact is irrefutable and undeniable. The holy city is Petra. This is where Adam and Ishmael built a temple or masjid at Baqarah, mentioned in the Quran. The Ummah and the Hajj was here. This is where the prophets and messengers, including the Sabians, Jews and Christians, did the annual pilgrimage. It's a history like Moses crossing the sea whilst Pharaoh drowned in his pursuit. Thank you, Dan Gibson, for your extensive and exhaustive research. I salute you, sir. You have saved me from doing a pagan, idolatrous ritual practice and some £3,000 at what they do in the false Mecca, Saudi Arabia. The Quran alone, the best hadith of Allah. Ashnal Hadith Peace. So I'm assuming this is a Muslim who agrees with Dan Gibson.
I just thought it was funny because he seemed to he seems so excited. He's writing in capital letters only. He seems so excited, like, thank you, Dan Gibson, because I didn't waste £3,000 on.
But I'm assuming he's a Muslim, so he's
he is a Muslim, but
Mecca is not the correct site, and it should be Petra. But yet he's also a Muslim. So maybe I'd like to see him have a discussion with somebody who thinks that Mecca is, in fact, the place.
Yeah, but he's also wrong.
Who is?
Muhammad Jamil.
Oh, in what sense is he wrong?
The earliest, he says all the earliest mosques point towards Petra for the first 100 years. This is not correct.
Okay, but the earliest ones did, or they didn't? Maybe not 100 years, but a short...
They don't actually point to Petra.
Where do they point?
Well, we don't really know because it's all over the show.
Oh, okay. So even with Google, whatever, or, some kind of...
like I told you, we've done this with Klingshaw.
Yeah.
And we came up, the closest that he came up with is a city which is something like 100 Ks, I would imagine, the southwest of Petra.
Okay, but that's still not Mecca, though. That's not Mecca, though.
No, it's definitely not Mecca. No. None of the earliest mosques point towards Mecca. There he's correct, but not that they all point towards Petra.
Right. Oh, so that's just an interesting statement in and of itself.
Yeah.
Right, moving on. Whoa, that was too far. Hang on a moment. Let's, okay.
I wonder what makes him think like this. What gives
Well,
him
obviously,
the freedom to go against all the scholars?
obviously, the Dan Gibson thing for him was seemingly quite persuasive. Here's one from yourself. Thank you so much. So obviously, you're replying to somebody. Maybe you can give the context here.
Well, this is a video, and the guy in the video says blah 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 blah, and it's not true.
Okay, so this was a video that you were commenting on that was a Muslim or Muslim-inspired video.
Correct, where he was glorifying Muhammad and says that this is something that we need to understand. We need to go and learn Arabic. We need to do all sorts of things.
Obviously, okay. So you said false. The Quran does not say any of what he claims. The Quran merely implores the reader to contemplate the Quran. This is a simpleton using language he himself does not understand, but Muslims will not stop him from embarrassing himself. Muhammad was also a monster, yet he pretends Muhammad was a role model. And the response to you, one of the responses clearly is, that is in the Quran, either you like it or not, and keep hating all you want. Let me ask you a question, and Abu as well. What is it with this thing about hating? So when you critically analyze, I notice a lot of Muslims just interpret this as hating. I don't know if this is a narrative that they've just sort of jumped on board, or whether, that because when you critique something, that's automatically hating. And this sort of goes a bit, hand in hand with Islamophobia and all this sort of thing. You're a hater if you, seriously or, bluntly criticize whatever it may be. Again, maybe they're just not used to in most Muslims are not used to being criticized, or whatever the case is, or have their ideology criticized. I don't know. So obviously the word hating comes out there just because that's a nice, buzzword like Islamophobia or racist or Nazi or whatever it might be, as if that's an argument for anything. But again, if you're doing that at a low level, it'll appeal to those sort of people that sort of like to respond with those sort of words. Cool. And another one from you. Stop spamming. Oh, let me make it a little bit bigger. Hopefully I can see it here. Stop spamming. Which ground are you standing on? Is Jesus God for you, or you believe in Trinity? Are you a follower of St. Paul? Or
on Trinity.
On Trinity.
On Trinity.
Are you a Trinity? Yeah, okay, Trinity. Yeah. Are you a follower of St. Paul or Master Jesus? Choose one, Master or Bastard Paul. Or are you a blind atheist sheep? Let me know, then we can continue. No pointing, you son of a bitch. Don't interrupt in the middle when I talk to you. And Glenn Z. Wiseman, both are a motherfucker and interrupting when somebody has a dialogue or conversation. Stop spamming. Criticize something which is not right and can take you into wrong direction. But if you know that everything is crystal clear and right, then you are slapping on your face and denying the truth. Stop spamming. Also remove this profile picture first from your YouTube profile. You don't deserve for this. I hope it's not a Jesus picture. So I don't know what it is, but you shouldn't remove it. Beautiful, beautiful. You just got to love this. I mean, it's entertainment. You can't buy this, you just can't buy it. And these people are serious as well, aren't they? It's not like they're joking or trolling. Some of the, you get the professional trolls every now and again, which I think are easy to spot. But, some of these commenters are quite serious. I mean, I understand English is not their first language, so I'm not, picking this out for that, but it's more the thought process, if I can use that term loosely, that is being, brought forward here. So there we go. I think that's all of them. Yes, so that's all of them. So without further ado, Abu, I'm going to pass over to yourself now, so that you can give us a little bit of what you guys talked about before, and then we can have a conversation around the Reformation and whether Islamists should have one. Or
2 seconds. Can I stop spamming? Summarize what we talked about. Or wait a minute.
Oh my goodness! Is this a test?
Yes.
Did I nod off or not? I don't. What did we do? Well, we looked at the facts. We looked at what happened. We looked at who did what, when, and how, what it was based on. And of course, we went through each one of the 95 theses individually and discussed them at great length.
No, we didn't.
What else? That's all I remember.
Okay. I finished. So, okay,
yes, because then we wandered off, and the basic thing that I remember is we wandered off and we compared what Luther did for the Catholic Church and compared that to what it would do to Islam.
We were mostly talking about like today's situation with media and so on. But yeah, so on Tuesday this week, the 31st of October, it was exactly 500 years ago, Martin Luther pinned his 95 Theses on the church door in Wittenberg. And where is it? Wittenberg or Berg? So swimming.
Sorry, Wittenberg.
Wittenberg.
Berg. The hill.
Berg.
It's the hill of the Witten.
Yeah, it's the same. But it's like there's a Borg, meaning like a castle. There's a Berg, meaning like a hill or a mountain. But anyway, he pinned his 95 Theses there in Wittenberg, and that started the Reformation. And this is a very important point in European, but also I think in human history, because it kind of changed the world, changed the way people thought. Before that, everything had like the Catholic Church had kind of the monopoly on how you interpret the Bible, and like the whole of Western Europe pretty much was like controlled by like one religion controlled from Rome. But then Martin Luther reinterpreted a lot of things. He started to look at the sources, started to look at the Gospels, and saw that a lot of things that the Catholic Church did contradicted the Gospels, and thus he began his Reformation, which led to civil war and a lot of change. And I think it actually led to I think it's partly led to the Enlightenment, actually. It partly, I mean, you had the Henry V that wanted to marry Anne Boleyn in England, and he converted to Protestantism, probably just because he wanted to marry her and he wanted to have more control and so on. And later you have the English Civil War, and also during this period, a lot of Puritans moved to the United States, which shaped the culture there. So it has a very important part of Christian history, European history, but I also think in world history, because it, yeah. So I don't think the title of this show was, could there be something similar in Islam? Or is that needed, or what is needed?
Yeah, agreed. So,
by the way, did you guys hear what the Pope came up with now? He's questioning celibacy.
Yes, I did notice that. I did see that as well.
That was one of the things that Martin Luther questioned. So he married out of a sense of duty, as to show the way.
But he abolished it, because the pastors in the Protestant church do get married, absolutely.
Yeah, and he married, I think he had 6 children, Martin Luther.
So I think, can we all agree that, or not, if the case may be, that generally the mainstream Christianity, even with it's still supernatural, crazy ideas, etc., is less harmful, or is it less harmful than it was prior to the Reformation?
Yes.
I mean, is that demonstrable? I mean, I don't think
that is demonstrable, because I mean the whole concept, paying money to the Pope so that your sins would be reduced, that's totally dishonest. That's completely that's wrong. So there's a couple of things which were modified, which were in dire need of modification, because I mean, look at the Spanish Inquisition. They were going apeshit over there. That was crazy.
I think there's a lot of to say it like this, like as with everything, there are good sides and bad things with pretty much everything. Maybe not all things, but even in this case.
So do you, carry on, Amber, carry on.
But I think the important part of the Reformation was the unintended consequences. I think Martin Luther himself was a pious man and a religious man, and he was not a man of the Enlightenment. He was a man of like the late Middle Ages, maybe early Renaissance, but he didn't even think in a Renaissance way, I would say. He thought like a medieval person. But
Abu, can I just interrupt, because Allied Atheist Alliance is making an incredibly good point here, which I don't want to lose as it scrolls up, because he says the Protestant Reformation is not a good example to follow, by the way. All it did was create a schism and more sectarian wars. I think the key to Islamic reform is a political reform, and that is very, very important to keep in mind.
Keep in mind. I will comment on that later, because that is an important point. But where were we? Yeah, so the Reformation had many consequences. There were some intended consequences, which were Martin Luther's. He wanted to reform Christianity, not because he wanted to have kind of more secular, kind of hippy-dippy society. He wanted to reform it because he wanted to go back to the sources. He wanted to go back to the gospel and protect the gospel. And that is actually quite similar to Salafism, I would say. Or what some call Wahhabism. But I think it is the unintended consequences of the Reformation that led to most good things. Of course, one of the unintended consequences was like, for example, the 30 Years' War and so on. But the unintended consequence was because you have to remember, before the Reformation, back in those days, knowledge was pretty much the knowledge of the Bible. Of course, there was other things, but all kind of scholars were Catholic within the Catholic administration, so to speak, and they learned Latin. And
but
most people,
not just the Bible, it was what the monks said the Bible said, because people couldn't read it.
Partly what the Bible said, but also things like other things that, like the Catholic Church had a kind of monopoly on knowledge. It's not also, there's kind of one kind of a good thing that shows this or explains this. They had, for example, they decided what books were allowed and what books were not allowed. So they very like, as a way to view this, they actually had a kind of box in where they locked up all the forbidden books, and only the churchmen could access it. So most people, if you take it here in Scandinavia, for example, the average people, not even the, I don't think that many, not even the nobles, I think, but definitely not the peasants, didn't know Latin. That means that pretty much all knowledge, except for like how you plow the fields or something, all knowledge were removed from the populace. But with the Reformation, one of the major parts of the Reformation, not only Luther did it, also, what's it called, Zwingli, the Swiss guy from Zurich, Zwingli, what's his name? Zwingli or something. They translated the Bible into colloquial German, and later the Bible was translated into English and all other languages where you had Protestants. And this like spurred a kind of a renaissance or renaissance, but like it made normal people search for knowledge. Normal people got access to knowledge.
Have you heard this thing, ora et labora?
Ora et labora. It sounds like the hour of...
No. This is work and pray. So pray and work. This is the only thing that you were allowed to do in those days.
Yeah, exactly. But you have to just like, you went to the mass and you listened to these Latin words that you didn't understand. And if the churchman said something, you just, okay, I hear and I obey. I don't know why, but I just do it.
Like ancient Arabic.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to how many Muslims don't know in ancient Arabic, so then they just have to listen to the scholars. But I would say that even more like prohibited to in the case of Latin, because as I said, it was not only religious knowledge, like even they had a hold on everything. So the important part, the unintended consequences of this, I think, was that more and more people got access to all kinds of knowledge. And that, I don't think it is a coincidence, for example, that, or, well, you can argue about that. But I think that the kind of, and it also made people started to question things. And even though Luther's intention was only to question like the falsehoods of the Catholic Church, people started to question all kinds of things now. And so the unintended consequence of that, I think, was a bit more skepticism. And that little bit more skepticism, I think, fueled the Enlightenment and things like that. So I think like the rise of more kind of secularism, and maybe perhaps even that we got atheism quite early. Well, I'm not sure about that, but some kind of secularism and skeptic thought might be an unintended result of the Reformation in many ways. And it also had kind of political importance because like before that, like you had the church that was one part of the like political establishment. So you have the earthly power and the church power, and the church power was like separated from them, but had like special like they were exempt from normal law and so on. So especially in Northern Europe, you get a more secularized country. Although they were Christian, it become more kind of secular, and I think that was important. Back to the wars. Yes, so one of the bad consequences was that you had a lot of war between Catholics and the Protestants, and that resulted in many people killed. I mean, I don't know how many people died in those wars, but it was a huge chunk of the population. It's like if you Google it, you'll find some crazy number of people, the percentage that died in these wars. So that was called a bad thing. But was it Nietzsche said that the beginning of everything great in history has been soaked in blood thoroughly and for a long time.
That's certainly the case in the past. We're hoping that's not the case in the future. But as we notice some of the human population, I'm not sure that some of us have learned the lessons yet. But yeah, I would say that's true in the past.
So yeah, have I missed something?
Well, there is one thing I wanted to say based on what you said earlier. You said there were some good and bad things, and maybe I misinterpreted or took it in another way. I wanted to ask you whether there was any bad things compared to Christianity today as opposed to prior to the Reformation.
No, but what I'm still thinking of, you have to remember that the Renaissance happened before the Reformation. So you had all these Machiavelli and all the Renaissance thinkers that actually happened before the Reformation. And if you look at like Italy, one of the things that Luther didn't like was that they were kind of like Italy the Catholic Church spent a lot of money on frescoes and art, and they were very sinful, and they like. But for me, like I'm a Renaissance guy. I like the Renaissance. I think that is one of the greatest periods in history. And for me, that is something good. And in one way, Martin Luther was kind of a reaction, similar to like how the Salafis are a reaction on a kind of bid'ah version of Islam, a modernized bid'ah version of Islam that allows all these sinful things. For me, that is something good. I think so. In one way, it wasn't like, of course, Italy continued to be Catholics. It wasn't like it ended. But if you look at like many of how these fundamentalist Protestant movements, like the Puritans and like maybe perhaps the Anabaptists, I mean, they were almost like ISIS, almost not like ISIS, but you see, in that direction, they were kind of fundamentalist, crazy dudes. and in a way, like the Renaissance flourished in Catholic Italy because they rediscovered the ancient pre-Christian stuff. And for me, I think the Renaissance is the best period.
Yes. Okay, so moving or comparing that now with Islam, do you think, with your knowledge of Islam, etc., that a similar thing is possible in Islam? And if so, how? And if not, why?
No, so you sent me an article, and I skimmed through it, and for first, in Islam, you never had the same kind of administerial kind of structure. Of course, you had the Khalifa and so on, that was a kind of authority, but he wasn't really the religious authority in itself. It was more like a political figure that you have to follow. So Islam is like structured in another way. So I want to critique that article a little bit. I don't know, but he argued that what Islam needs is not a new Reformation, but rather a new John Locke, and that is, of course, fine. I mean, do
you want me to share the screen, or do you want to do it yourself and sort of?
You can share it if you want to, or maybe you want to read a little bit part of it.
Yeah.
Okay, you can read.
Yeah, you keep an eye on the comments there. I'm just going to bring this up. Okay, so I happened to come across this today as it happens, and here's an article by Mustafa Akiol. The Islamic world doesn't need a reformation, and obviously that's just a catchy title. The real subheading is why a Muslim John Locke would be much more useful than a Muslim Martin Luther. Various Western intellectuals, ranging from Thomas Friedman to Ayaan Hirsi Ali, argued over the past decades that Muslims need their own Martin Luther to save themselves from intolerance and dogmatism. The Protestant Reformation that Luther triggered exactly 500 years ago, these intellectuals suggest, can serve as a model for potential Muslim Reformation. But is there such a connection between the Reformation of Christendom and the reform that is arguably needed in Islam? To start with, it's worth recalling that Islam, in the form of the Ottoman Empire, helped Protestantism succeed and survive. In the 16th century, much of Europe was dominated by the Holy Roman Empire, which had ample means to crush the Protestant heretics. But the same Catholic Empire was also constantly threatened and kept busy by the Turks, whose own empire building inadvertently helped the Protestants. The Turk was the lightning rod that drew off the tempest, noted J.A. Wiley in his classic History of Protestantism. Thus did Christ cover his little flock with the shield of the Muslim. Do you want to comment on anything there, or shall I carry on?
Carry on. I have read it, so.
Cool. More importantly, some early Protestants desperately seeking religious freedom for themselves find inspiration for that in the Ottoman Empire, which was then more tolerant to religious plurality than were most Catholic kingdoms. Jean Bodin himself, a Catholic, but a critical one, openly admired this fact. The great emperor of the Turks, the political philosopher, wrote in the 1580s, "Destus not the strange religion of others, but to the contrary permitteth every man to live according to his conscience." This is why Luther himself had written about Protestants who want the Turk to come and rule because they think our German people are wild and uncivilized. Surely those days are long gone. The great upheavals that began in the West with the Protestant Reformation ultimately led to the Enlightenment, liberalism, and the modern-day liberal democracy, along with the darker fruits of modernity, such as fascism and communism. Meanwhile, the pre-modern tolerance of the Muslim world did not evolve into a system of equal rights and liberties. Quite the contrary, it got diminished by currents of militant nationalism and religious fundamentalism that began to see non-Muslims as enemies within. This is why it is the freedom-seeking Muslims today who look at other civilizations, the West, admiring that it has permitted every man to live according to his conscience. I'm not sure that the Protestant Reformation led to the dark fruits of fascism and communism. It's not. It doesn't follow.
It says a lot of things that I want to critique, but
yes, sure. Okay. Well, let's do it as we go through. So go ahead and critique if you can.
Okay, sorry, I only pay attention. But like, or can you scroll up, because there are several points here. You go back a little bit here, because the various Western intellectual rank from Thomas Friedman to Martin Luther and intolerance province. So to start, it's worth recalling that Islam in the form of the Ottoman Empire helped Protestantism succeed and survive. Yes, I mean it indirectly, because the Holy Roman Empire, like one of the reasons why the Holy Roman Emperor was afraid of persecuting or go too hard against like Luther and his allies, was because he wanted to keep the Holy Roman Empire together in case the Ottomans would attack and so on. So that's correct indirectly, but it wasn't because Protestant exactly liked Ottoman Empire. They said something like, how many is it?
Well, and it could have been the Ottoman Empire was more tolerant, but again, the form of tolerance that they're talking about then is nothing that we would compare today. So yes, it could well have been. I'm open to that possibility, and you may say it's not the case, or it may be the case, who knows, that it was potentially more tolerant. But if you have something like a North Korea, let's say, in the modern day, then almost anything is going to be more tolerant. So if you go to Saudi Arabia, they're going to go, oh my goodness, it's so much more tolerant here than it is in North Korea. You know, a North Korean person could say that potentially. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's anything like what we would want today.
I mean, can you scroll down just a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah.
So first, like, was the Ottoman Empire more tolerant? I mean, that is up to debate.
Yeah, sure. But let's give it to him that it was potentially more. Let's be charitable and suggest that that's more the case. Unless you've got overwhelming evidence that rules that out, let's assume that were the case. So what?
Okay. Yeah. But
because his claim is that Christ is, that some people welcomed, and I've heard this claim about the Andalusian sort of quote paradise and that sort of thing, that people were welcoming and asking the Muslims to come and help them and to rid them of the yoke of fundamentalist Christianity.
I mean that is another thing. I mean that is in that case I'm more sure of that is BS. But in the case, was the Ottoman Empire itself more tolerant than Catholic Europe? Yeah.
But again, I think
like
maybe
Catholic Europe in that. I mean that is it's too complicated to answer yes and a no on that question.
I would agree with you. You've got to look at different things. There could be certain things they're more tolerant, some things they're not. So painting with a broad
areas, like
like
as I talked about the Renaissance. No, I wanted to say that quote. Want the Turk? Yeah. So here, as I said again, the Renaissance happened before. Started before the Reformation, you have to remember, and that was in Catholic Spain. As Catholic Italy, which wasn't Italy back then because it was divided into city-states. But yeah, so J.A. Wiley in his classic History of Protestantism, thus did Christ cover his little flock with the shield of the Muslim. So, like, meaning that, as I said before, they like one of the reasons why they didn't want to split up was because they needed all the forces they had, which didn't happen anyway. So yes, but it wasn't like the Protestant liked Muslims. You have to remember this was religious people.
Yeah, it's like taking on the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, or not, maybe not even that. Maybe they preferred Catholics to, at least maybe they saw them. But that is complicated. But anyway. More importantly, some early Protestants desperately seeking religious freedom for themselves found inspiration for that in the Ottoman Empire. I'm not.
Okay, I mean, let's not split hairs too much on that.
Okay, the great emperor of the Turks, blah blah. Okay, scroll down a little bit because this is more. I think he is virtue signaling here. Surely those days are gone. The great upheavals that began in the West with the Protestant Reformation ultimately led to the Enlightenment liberalism. Yes, this is what I talked about before. I think it unintended this wasn't the guys like Martin Luther's intentions, but it happened because it freed like knowledge and so on, along with the darker fruits of modernity, such as fascism and communism.
Again, those
okay.
Yeah, but that's not a deliberate thing that happened. You know, those are just
no
byproducts in a sense, but it's not that it ultimately led to these things. I think that's not.
I think liberalism was a byproduct of what had happened.
Yeah, but you can argue. You can make an argument. This was, of course, unintended, but you can make an argument. For example, you see the peasant uprising, which Martin Luther was really against it. He had very harsh things to say about that, and maybe you can say that. I mean, especially in Scandinavia, the Protestant regimes that was created were kind of fascist in a way, and so maybe, but that is a little bit of a long shot. I mean, communism is also
okay. But so I think the bigger point though here is that these are unintended consequences. It wasn't as if this was their goal. They were going, we're going to have this Reformation and it's going to give us the Enlightenment, liberalism. Oh, and by the way, it might also give us these dark things called fascism and communism. Obviously,
I mean, what Luther did was that he before, like, there was like separation between when you do the holy life in Catholic was doing the religious rituals within the church, but for Luther, even doing work is an act of worship in a sense. So like he said something like there are many quotes. I think it was something like, a woman that takes care of her child is better than a monk praying, or something like that. And he said, like, doing your work with the intention of you doing it for the glory of the Lord, that is a kind of worship, and for him it's better worship. So it has a lot of emphasis on work and the virtue of the common man, of the peasant. And for Luther, that was very important. When he went to this trial, he was very keen on showing that I am from the peasant. He said something, you have to excuse my kind of peasant origins, that I might not be able to formulate in a good way. So yeah, maybe that you can say that has something with the fascism and communism, but it's a little bit a long shot.
Okay,
nationalism. Yeah, nationalism, you can say.
Yeah, but it's all unintended, though.
No. This is not that unintended. Nationalism, yes. Luther played a lot on his kind of German sentiments. Like, so that there you could say there is a kind of nationalism, or maybe today we would use the the word populism, which I think it's a kind of misused word today, or like they use populism for anything. But yes, he played on German sentiments. Where are you now? I missed the nationalist part. Where that national religious fundamentals that began to see. No, you were there. I think you were.
Yes. So now we
nationalism and religious fundamentalism that began to.
Okay, but we've done this already.
Okay, yeah.
Let's just move on.
We move on, sure. And that is also why there are people today, especially in the West, who think that a Muslim Martin Luther is desperately needed. Yet, a good-willed as they may be, they are wrong, because while Luther's main legacy was the breakup of the Catholic Church's monopoly over Western Christianity, Islam has no such monopoly that needs to be challenged. There is simply no Muslim Pope. That is correct. Or a central organization like Catholic hierarchy, whose suffocating authority needs to be broken. That is quite true. Quite the contrary, the Muslim world, at least the Sunni Muslim world, which constitutes its overwhelming majority, has no central authority at all, especially since the abolition of the caliphate in 1924 by Republican Turkey. The ensuing chaos in itself seems to be a part of the problem. Like, this is a little bit, yes, you have to remember that Islam is structured in a completely different way. like there is no Catholic Church that has what is it that Islam said? Render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, and so on. So in Catholic Church started more like you have the religion and then you have the Caesars, but then the Catholic Church took on itself more and more political things. So in the end, they, like in the time of Luther, they were almost like kings. So they were mightier than kings. They waged wars and things like that, and had an economy in itself. But one thing that I think this author kind of forgets is that in Islam, the political part is integrated is too weak a word. It is the political part of Islam is the skeleton of Islam. You can't separate the political part of Islam from the purely spiritual part. They are the same.
Yeah, he does talk about that later on in the article.
Okay.
So we'll come back to that. But one of the things I wanted to highlight here is, obviously there's no what we would consider a central Muslim pope, etc. But there is a central ideology, a doctrine generally accepted by most Sunnis. You know, even if we put aside the Shias and the Ahmadiyyas and so on, there's a central doctrine that is there. Whether there's a pope that enforces it, as in says, hey, here's the central doctrine, but most Sunni Muslims accept certain claims and certain parts of the ideology.
There's no one pope, but there is a body of ulama, a body of scholars.
Correct. And they generally, yes, I'm sure they're going to disagree on small points, but none of them are going to disagree that on the bigger points, and these may not be as controversial or as consequential potentially for the world, like, you know, somebody came and spoke to Muhammad in a cave. I don't think anybody's going to disagree on that. Where they might disagree is the age of Aisha or something like that, which is mostly, I would suggest, and I would humbly submit, is because of the clash with modern modernity. So in the past, I'm not sure that there was as much of a conversation around this as there is today, because of course they've hit the modernity, and we are looking at this going, no, this is unacceptable. And now they're scrambling to find a way to make this acceptable and yet still be true to the. So now they're all over the show.
Yeah, so they will differ on small details, but they won't no scholar will say that we won't pray 5 times a day. So, but they will differ on things like where do you hold your hands on your chest or on your belly bottom, for example.
But those are virtually inconsequential. It's the big things that the West, you know, shudders at, if I can put it mildly. You know, the killing of apostates, you know, marrying off of small children, slavery, etc., etc. That's where, you know, the conversation is being had today, I'm guessing, by scholars, at least some of them, but pushed primarily or partly, at least, if not primarily, partly with, you know, the collision with Western modernity, where we look at this and go, this is just unacceptable. And in order for them to be seen as acceptable in the Western world, now they have to in some way try and make this look acceptable, but yet try and keep it in line with the Quran. And that's where I see the big disconnect. They're trying desperately to try and make the two seem like that by making hadiths now weak, or just ignoring certain hadiths, or whatever the case is, or reinterpreting certain verses of the Quran.
Yeah, but
something
what
else.
people are you talking about now? Because like the real kind of Salafi scholars don't even really do that.
No, sure, but are they the majority or are they the minority?
I mean, that is hard to say.
Okay,
exactly,
so I use my experience.
But you have more extreme in one direction. So you have the more extreme guys that don't excuse themselves, and then you have the more extremes on the other hand, like our guy like the Saracen, who try to make excuses for pretty much everything.
Yes, anything can be interpreted in any way. If that's the case, then the message is so diluted. The problem for anybody who says that is the message is so diluted that you can pick and choose whatever interpretation you want. And if that's the case, then the supposed God is a bumbling fool, because the message is not clear enough.
But the original Ahl Sunnah body of text don't differ that much. Okay, maybe we should continue. In fact, the Muslims world of today resembles any period in Christian history. It is not the pre-Reformation, but rather the post-Reformation era. The latter was a time when not just Catholics and Protestants, but also different varieties of the latter were at each other's throats, self-righteously claiming to be the true believers while condemning others as heretics. It was a time of religious wars and suppression of theological minorities. It would be a big exaggeration to say that the whole Muslim world is now going through such bloody sectarian strife, but some parts of it, such as Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, undoubtedly are. So this is kind of correct in the sense that the wars you see, the sectarian wars you see now, has similarities with the sectarian war you had after the Reformation. But the thing is, these sectarian conflicts, it's not that they just appeared right now, in the, like it were in the post-Reformation area. These sectarian conflicts has been going on for a long time. So it's not like the first time the Shias and the Sunnis are at each other's throat. So
yeah, but and also what's not mentioned by this author is the condemnation and subjugation of non-Muslims in virtually every Muslim majority country to whatever degree. Now, people hold out Malaysia or Indonesia as examples of tolerant societies, but if you actually go and look at news reports and you look a little bit closer, it's not as tolerant as you think, or at least in certain parts of the country, it's not tolerant.
If we are in a post-Reformation area right now, then that era has gone on for like more than 1,000 years. So, yeah. Besides, various reform movements have already emerged in the Muslim world in the past 2 centuries. Just like Luther's Reformation, these movements claim to go back to the scriptural roots of the religion to question the existing tradition. While some of the reformists took this step with the intention of rationalization and liberalization, giving us the promising current called Islamic modernism, others did it with the exact opposite goal of dogmatism and Puritanism. The latter trend gave us Salafism, including its Saudi version of Wahhabism, which is more rigid and intolerant than the traditional mainstream. I mean, here he's playing, I think. Like, this is something I come back to many, many times. Salafism and Wahhabism is nothing new. It's not like a Saracen want to say that Mr. Wahhabi invented Salafism. No, Salafism goes back at least to Ahmed ibn Hanbal, and probably even longer than that, or longer than that.
Yeah, but the main claim that they want to make here is that this is kind of a extremist minority point nowadays. So I'm sure they're not denying that, and it may also be that it goes back that far. Let's assume that it does. Well, but I think what I'm reading when I listen to this is that, hey, here's this intolerant, rigid version, but hey, this isn't even the majority view of Sunni Muslims. So let's put it aside.
Even if it's that, it's a very large minority. It's like you're saying, like in Germany, for example, the CDU party, or the Christian, like what's her name? Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats. They are a minority party because they don't have over 50%. Yeah, but they're still a very large party. Or maybe it's better to say the Social Democrats, but what is this? What is this mainstream traditional Sunni Islam? I don't really see what it is. What the mainstream traditional Sunni Islam is, what I think they are more talking about average awam that are not really practicing as they should. But
maybe I'm just thinking about it now. Maybe a topic should be, what do most Muslims actually believe? And maybe that's a topic for another hangout, where we bring out, and in particular, the more controversial things. Do most Muslims believe in some kind of punishment for apostasy? Do most Muslims believe in X, Y, and Z? Because praying 5 times a day, I don't mind what they do behind their door, ideally as long as they don't hurt themselves or other members, but I certainly do have more of a concern when it's propagated to the wider world. And so maybe that's a conversation to be had, because otherwise we do get pinned down into this position that you're talking about here. Well, who knows? Nobody speaks for it, etc.
Yeah, but I want to stress this. What he is like, he what he calls, which is more rigid than intolerant than the traditional mainstream. What is this traditional mainstream?
Exactly.
I think he is not attacking a straw man, is not correct, but he's building up a cloud. Maybe there's a dream of something that this doesn't exist. This traditional mainstream. What is this? I would say that what he calls traditional mainstream is more separated into many small parties.
Yeah, but he doesn't define that. So if his next sentence was, and what I mean by traditional mainstream is X, Y, and Z, now we can unpack that and go, oh, okay, do we agree with this? Is that what most Muslims believe? Let's ask Muslims, is this what you believe? Is this traditional? Do you consider yourself a traditional mainstream Muslim? And if so, is what this author's saying your views or not? But at the moment, he just throws that term out there.
He will never say this. He will never define what it is. And this is why this is so like he's deceiving people by this, or not only him, many people.
Let's move on, because basically he's just saying that there's a bit of violence there and savagery, blah blah blah, but it's only really from a violent minority of Wahhabism or Salafism, etc. So let's move on down to
that is partially true in a sense, but also false. Okay, we continue. That is why those who hope to see a more tolerant, free, and open Muslim world should seek the equivalent, not of the Protestant Reformation, but the next great paradigm in Western history, the Enlightenment. The contemporary Muslim world needs not a Martin Luther, but a John Locke. This is kind of interesting. Okay, so it is true. I think a reformation in that sense is hard to do in Islam, but an enlightenment a la John Locke is also very hard. And the reason why it's so hard, is he's pretty much referring to John Locke's Aqidah and John Locke's political philosophy. And the problem with Islam is that you have this concept of bid'ah, that you're not allowed to make bid'ah.
Which is what, for people who don't know?
Invention. Mm-hmm. So you're not like to change the religion, you're not to invent new inventions, what is clearly there in the texts. So when Martin Luther, his Reformation was to go back to the Gospels, go back to the original sources. So, but if you go back to the original source in Islam, you will see that your bid'ah is like, it's mentioned how many times, like you can't do bid'ah. And this is the problem with the John Locke, because the political part of Islam is not that it is integrated, it is like a fundamental part of Islam. So you can't have this kind of secular John Lockean Enlightenment view in Islam, because that you would destroy Islam itself. You would destroy the skeleton of Islam.
Well, let's see what he says as to why he thinks you can. So let's read on, and then you can challenge him.
Whose arguments for freedom of conscience and religious toleration planted the seeds of liberalism, in particular the more religion-friendly British Enlightenment, rather than the French one, can serve as a constructive model. And as I argued elsewhere, special attention should also be given the Jewish Enlightenment, also called Hashkala, and its pioneers such as Moses Mendelssohn. Islam as a legalist religion has more commonalities with Judaism than with Christianity. Yeah, that is correct. Luckily, effort toward Muslim enlightenment have been presented since the 19th century in the form of the above-mentioned Islamic modernism. British historian Christopher de Belligue deftly demonstrated the achievements of his trend in his recent book, The Islamic Enlightenment. He also rightly noted that this promising era, also called the liberal age of Arabic thought by the late historian Albert Urani, experienced a major step back in the 20th century with Western colonialism and the reaction it provoked. Then came a wave of counter-enlightenment, which is the fundamentalist revival that created Islamism and Jainism. I think he is...
Okay, so is the claim there, let me summarize it. Is the claim there that there was some enlightenment present, and it took a major step back because of Western colonialism and the reactions. In other words, because the Western powers went to colonialize, to take over those countries. Is that what you understand by this, if we summarize it? And that's why there's been a counter-enlightenment.
That is a truth with a lot of modification. Yes, there were some kind of like enlightenment-like voices there, but it's not like when the British came, they're like, oh, they stumbled upon a completely enlightened world. That's not how it was.
Or put another way, had the Western, let's quote it, had the Western colonialism not happened, would we have seen an enlightenment? Would we see a Muslim enlightenment that's anywhere near what we are today? Or would we say that their enlightenment is 500 years behind, in the same way that it would have been at the time of the Enlightenment 500 years ago?
I doubt it.
No, I agree.
Of course, we will never know, but I seriously doubt it.
No, you can't. It's no longer Islam. This is the problem.
Yeah, that's a problem, like a general problem with this argument. That if you have someone that is like John Locke, he per definition would not be a Muslim. Like it's very hard. As a result, the Muslim world of today is a very complex place where secularists, liberal reformists, liberal conservatives, passionate fundamentalists, and violent jihadists all enjoy varying degrees of influence from region to region, nation to nation. The pressing question is how to move this world in a positive direction.
Okay, before you carry on though, I mean, that makes it sound as if all of these different people, obviously I think most of us would consider ourselves secularists to some degree, that they all, like it almost makes it sound as if, hey, from here, from place to place, they all kind of have some sway, and that what you got, I could draw from this, is that it's a bit of everything out there. And I'm not sure that that's a very accurate representation. There's a lot more fundamentalism and very little of the secularism and liberal reformers and whatever degrees of influence they really have. I mean, if you had to go and look at the regions that have a majority Muslims, how many of those regions have got secularists and, quote, liberal reformers that enjoy, quote, varying degrees of influence? And if that varying degree is like 1,000 people, is that really any degree of influence compared to the rest? So I think it's all putting it all to one as almost as if, hey, there's all these different people. It's very complex. It's not like there's a majority view. It seems to me there is clearly a majority view, and it's not secularism or liberal reformism.
That is an illusion. Because there is no central religious authority to lead the way, one should consider the only definite authority available, which is the state. Whether we like it or not, the state has been quite influential on religion throughout the history of Islam. It has become even more so in the past century, when Muslims overwhelmingly adopted the modern nation state and its powerful tools such as public education, and they have been very authoritarian and so on. It really matters.
Okay, before you carry on though, his claim is that the state is the sort of definitive authority. I'm surprised he doesn't say the Quran.
Which is kind of funny, because that first he argued that you need a John Locke, and then he argues for that the state should be the
solution.
It's
not that he argues the state should be. He says the state is the definitive authority available at the moment, currently.
Oh, okay.
And I'm surprised he doesn't go to the Quran.
But if he is arguing that the state is the solution, I think that
not the solution.
I think that goes against the Lockean.
No, he's not saying the solution. He's just saying it's the definitive authority available, is what I'm reading. The only definitive authority available, because they don't have a pope.
Okay.
Therefore, the different states are the definitive authority. But if that's the case,
but that's not quite true either, because they hate these states.
Who
they don't live. People who live there, they hate. Like if you go to Muslim countries, they hate their regimes. They care way more about what the ulama says and their mashayikh than the state. They hate their states most often.
Okay, if you
they hate the state power.
I mean, you make it sound as if the majority of Muslims in Muslim countries do not agree with what their governments or
No, they don't.
ruling authorities put out there? I mean, have you got...
In general, not. Maybe perhaps Saudi Arabia is an exception, but in general, the reason why it's so influential is because they have an iron grip on the people.
But I'm just wondering, where is that anecdotal evidence, or have you got actual evidence that the majority of Muslims in Muslim states do not agree with or find
just see what happened during the Arabic Spring, and
yeah, but those were dictators. Those are not what we consider today Muslim states, though.
Yeah, but then okay, in Tunis now it's going. But
so use the Muslim Brotherhood as an example. That took over from Mubarak, who was clearly a dictator. I can understand the majority of people did not like Mubarak, and the reason they didn't like, one of the main reasons potentially, is because he was very critical of Islam, or he kept it in check. Now you get the Muslim Brotherhood who takes over,
on religious Muslims,
who follows more of the Quran, potentially, and the Hadiths, etc. And now you have more people who are agreeing with that.
Yeah.
So.
And now we have Sisi, which is pretty much Mubarak.
Do you want to add anything in here, Stops, before we continue?
No, I'm just following the chats, and there's something,
okay, cool.
and I'm just looking. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It really matters, therefore, whether the state promotes a tolerant or bigoted interpretation of Islam. It really matters, for example, when the Saudi monarchy, which for decades has promoted Wahhabism, vows to promote moderate Islam, as Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman recently did, giving some hope for the future. It is especially significant that this call for moderation implies not just fighting terrorism, but also liberalizing society by curbing the religion police, empowering women, and being open to the world and or religions. Yeah, that is a slight...
Well, I mean, I agree that it really matters that happens. That the question is, A, can it happen? And B, if it does, how does that affect, the interpretation of the Quran and Hadiths?
And you're going to have a huge chunk of the Saudi society that hates him for it.
Because all the fundamentalists need to do is say, hey, it doesn't say that in the Quran, here's the words. And now they've got to battle against that. And that's the same thing with Majid Nawaz and all other reformers.
Yeah, Majid Nawaz is way more extreme than...
Yeah, I know.
Okay, this argument may sound counterintuitive to some Western liberals who are prone to think that the best thing for a state is to just stay out of religion. This is what I was talking about, the kind of Lockean perspective, that you see the American Revolution, it is very much like separating religion and state and letting everybody free to practice the religion as they wish and so on. And I think that is very hard to do in Islam. And
but the reason is the very next sentence you talk about there. So just read it.
Okay. But in reality, where the state is already deeply involved in religion, its steps toward moderation and liberalization should be welcome. It's also worth remembering that the success of the Enlightenment in Europe was partly thanks to the era of enlightened despots, the monarchs who preserved their power even as they realized crucial legal, social, and educational reforms. A very good example is Napoleon Bonaparte with his Code Napoleon that changed a lot. But yeah.
Now, I would agree that any baby step towards liberalization and modernization is to be encouraged in that sense. And so if the state is in fact the power, which it appears to be, until there's an uprising, whatever the case is, but I haven't seen an uprising against a Muslim government, and maybe there is. Point it out to me. I'm happy to be wrong there. All the uprisings appear to be against what
secular governments. Yes, they hate their
either secular or dictators that weren't following the Quran strictly, like say the Wahhabis.
Yeah. They hate them. The only government that the people in that country like, or its own citizens, is probably Saudi Arabia. That is maybe not only because of Islam. It's maybe also partly because of the oil thing, that it's cheap to buy oil and benefits and so on. But it's partly because they don't see, of course, the Al-Qaeda dudes see them as apostates too. But that's a kind of extreme view. Okay, when we look at the Middle East, we see that countries with enlightened monarchies such as Morocco and Jordan promote an exemplify religious moderation, unlike the many revolutionary republics that ends up as authoritarian one-party states or tyrannies of the illiberal majority. Only Tunisia stands out as an exceptional bright spot. And in Malaysia, where I recently had the unexpected chance to become acquainted with the religion enforcement police, it is the sultans that try to keep such zealots and their popular support in check. But as I said, they are hated among the people, partly because of that. So it's like when if you look at the civil war, a huge chunk of the rebels against the king wanted religious freedom to practice what they want, but in this case it's like we don't want that. We want an Islamic governance.
But I think it goes back to what Stopp says, which is the more you become moderate and enlightened, it seems to stray away from the Quran and the Hadiths, as most Muslims understand them. Now you have to interpret them very differently in order to try and keep that and to move towards the modernization / liberalism.
Yeah.
And that's what I see, for example, in Speaker's Corner, that the apologists there are trying desperately to try and make Islam seem palatable to, the Western world or to, Western ears. And so they're doing all kinds of dances, which you guys are obviously better at spotting, particularly with the specific Qurans and hadith verses and hadiths, etc. And so that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to have the cake and eat it and go, hey, no. All these states, they're wrong. If they just interpret it or follow the Quran as we, the apologists in Speaker's Corner, say, then we'd have the best society on earth. And that's the summary of the view that I hear there most often. And then when you question that, then they go, no. Hey, I'll give you an example. Apostasy. No. Apostasy is okay. This is what they say basically. Apostasy is okay as long as you don't go out into the street and preach it, because doing so then is seen as treason. You're now going against the state, in which case you can, in that particular case, you can then be sentenced to death. So they're making it sound as if you're doing something that's treasonous, like you're trying to overthrow the state by apostatizing and then speaking your mind. So being like a Speaker's Corner, for example, in some of these countries. And this is what they're trying to say, to make it sound like, no, apostasy really, it's like what you guys in the West would have as treasonous, as in somebody who's committed treason. And of course, that's not the case that we're aware of anywhere. And so they're trying to make it sound like, they're trying to make these things sound like what we do in the West is just that we use a different name. So apostasy is like treason. That's the argument I hear.
Okay. A full-fledged Islamic enlightenment would require other features, such as the rise of Muslim middle class, which would itself require market-based economies rather than rentier states, and an atmosphere of free speech in which novel ideas can be discussed without persecution. We are adopting that kind of values now in the West, unfortunately, where we are losing free speech and the ability.
You're absolutely right. So where in the Muslim world is free speech the same free speech that we get in Speaker's Corner, for example? Name me a single country in that is a Muslim majority or Muslim ruled country in the world where that's the case. And like you've just said very correctly, Abu, we are starting to roll back that freedom of speech in the West, partly because of religious hurt feelings, etc., etc. So,
and certain political groups that are very keen on shutting down the speech.
Yes, and so we are moving backwards because of regressive ideas by some religious people and some, quote, I use the words, secular people in inverted commas. And so what's the chance of this free speech being available in these Muslim countries if it's being rolled back in the West? I would suggest very unlikely.
Yeah, but so that's an important enlightenment value.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Sam Harris says, like free speech is like the absolute most basic Is the
bedrock,
most value. Like without that, like if you want to develop your intellect, you need to hear different opinions from all kinds of things, and like it's impossible to if you can't hear different views, it's pretty much impossible to develop a sound view on your own. Like is the most essential thing. Freedom of thought is maybe, but you're not going to have much thought if you can't hear different things. Anyway, if the Protestant Reformation teaches us anything, it is that the road from religious fracturing to religious tolerance is long and winding. The Muslim world is somewhere on the road at the moment, and more twists and turns probably await us in the decades to come. In the meantime, it would be a mistake to look at the darkest forces within the current crisis of Islam and to arrive at pessimistic conclusions about its supposedly immutable essence. I don't know. I think that's, well, like the problem with, you can't have a Muslim lock, because it's not really correct to say that Locke was a Christian Locke even. It was a separate idea. The problem with Islam, that Islam is, the political thing in Islam is that it's not even integrated, it's an essential part of it. So therefore, I think what you need is not a Muslim reformer, you need a Muslim apostate. People have to become apostates and start to cherish Enlightenment values instead of Islamic values.
Yes, and that's, I think, and Stops has said it, and you've kind of intimated the same thing. It's almost like you need to break away from it and then reinterpret it as almost like an apostate. If you want to, I'm sure people would see Maajid Nawaz and others like him as apostates, essentially.
Yeah,
or something similar. And they've said that
it would be better if the Arabs went back to their native pagan idolatry. That would be better, because paganism is way more like compatible with Enlightenment values. They should become pagans.
Why don't they just? Well, if they're going to do that, then of course they become ex-Muslims. In which case, why not just join the rest of us as secular humanists and non-believers?
Yeah, but at least they have a religion then, so they should go back to become pagans again. That would probably be best.
Yeah, I see it as a difficult challenge for anybody. When I listen to Maajid Nawaz, etc., he's very eloquent on, and his condemnations are clear on the bad verses in the Quran, etc., that we shouldn't have these today, etc., etc. And when he engages with other Muslims, like he did with Abbas on LBC Radio and others, then he's quite strong. I would actually like to have him on as a guest here. I mean, maybe I'll try and do that. And I guess my question is, what sort of success is he having? What is his strategy for it? And maybe he doesn't want to say that openly. And why is he still a Muslim? If there's so many things that are wrong with it, what is it that keeps somebody like that, who is could be seen as a reformer, still a Muslim?
Is he?
And I'm not. Say again? Well, he claims to be. Yeah, he claims to be. But again, would other Muslims see him as that? Well, that's a different story. But we can only go with what somebody claims they are. If he claims he's a Muslim, and now here's his reasons for being Muslim, I'm not necessarily going to argue with that unless he said, "Hey, I'm a Muslim, but I don't believe that Muhammad was the last messenger." Then I'd be hang on.
I don't buy that story, but I'm never going to challenge him publicly, because it doesn't make sense. I think he's much better working from the inside than from the outside. So I think I would exactly go with it and leave it there.
Yeah, I would just ask him, what is it that he sees that is so good in Islam still, even though he's critical of certain things about that? And obviously then he can answer those questions. But you're right. I one could ask him more questions. You could push the issue, but is that useful? I guess my question more is, how effective is his method? And now when I've asked people, and this is just anecdotal, so I don't have numbers and statistics, but when I've asked people down in Speaker's Corner, and again it's primarily Sunnis there, and sort of more I'm not going to say hardcore, but they're not moderate. Occasionally I come across a moderate person, but generally they're not moderates. They're more on the fundamentalist side down there, and all of them dislike Majid Nawaz as far as being either as apostate, or he's not a Muslim, or he's hated, or there's a big negativity towards that sort of reformist. So whether that echoes the majority of Sunnis, obviously I don't know. I can only talk about the people that I've spoken to personally on the occasions when I brought up that name with people. I very seldom hear anything positive. Certainly not.
But what's the name of the foundation? There's a Quilliam Foundation. What's it called?
Quilliam
Foundation.
Yeah, which is his foundation, isn't it?
And that is, they have an office.
One of the founding members, yeah.
They have an office in London, don't they?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're in London sometime, you could go down there and knock on the door. And if you can't get Majid Nawaz, then maybe you can get some other dude from that.
Well, there's another one that's Adam Dean is one of his personnel or colleagues or whatever. There's a number of them there.
Well, Tommy was.
Tommy
Robinson.
What was a colleague? Oh, he went down there, you mean?
No, he was a colleague for a while.
Oh, was he? Okay.
They recruited him, and when he left EDL, he went to Quilliam.
Oh, okay. What happened there? How did he leave them then, or what was the?
Well, suddenly he wasn't. I don't know. I've never seen him do anything.
Well, obviously,
it was just a publicity stunt.
He's a show in itself. He's comical
obviously
show.
against it entirely, and so they're trying to keep a foot in the door, and at the same time trying to reform. And I think that's the challenge, of. I don't know if there's any other way. We've obviously just seen that one article, but from your experience, either of you, do you think that there's any way to reform Islam to what most modern Christians are today?
No, you can't, because this is what I've always been trying to say now for the last hour, that Islam has a concept which, if you destroy the concept, then you can modernize it, then you can reform it. But as soon as you start reforming Islam, you lose Islam. It is no longer Islam, because Islam has this structure that everything is political. It has this structure that is built on the Quran. It has the structure that you have an authority, which is the ulema. You have the structure that you have the scholars, that you are not even allowed to interpret the Quran yourself. So you have to listen to authority.
And the concept of bid'ah, which has infected the whole body of Islamic text.
We've got somebody. Okay, I want your opinion on this. It's kind of it's a side topic, but it's something that was obviously mentioned in the show. So there's a Muslim in the chat there saying apostate there's no such thing in the Quran. If you're an ex-Muslim, honestly, you will enter paradise.
The word apostate does not appear. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the concept of apostasy is in the Quran, and it is punishable by death. So what the fuck?
The one who takes another religion than Islam will not be accepted from him, loosely translated.
But that's in the Quran or the Hadith?
Yeah, in Quran.
Okay. So I'm not sure where
this is the reason why we still have Islam. Without this, there would be no more Islam. Everybody would have left long ago.
Or at least some of them would, yeah. Easier than it is today, isn't it?
It's just the fear. It's people being submitted into this. It's the brainwashing, exactly what we had with the Catholic Church 1,000 years ago. They had the monopoly on knowledge, and this is what you have in Islam today. The scholars, the scholars. I'm putting air quotes in here.
Mm-hmm.
They have the knowledge, and you need to follow what they are saying. You are not allowed to have an opposite opinion to what is. I mean, if somebody has the title scholar, like Zakir Naik has the title scholar, you're not actually allowed to do what Hijab and this Osama guy are doing. You're not allowed to do that.
Who gives Zakir Naik the title scholar?
Yeah, people. I mean,
I don't think that
Zindani is supposed to be a scholar. Come on, he's an asshole. But he is given the title scholar, and you're not allowed to argue against him. This is unless you are another scholar. And this is the problem in the whole concept. You cannot change anything in Islam without sacrificing Islam. And that's the way that it goes. It's realistic. Either you get Islam 2.0 with a Quran 2.0, which includes everything from the Hadith, or it's a losing battle.
And here, by the way, for those who are interested, is a link in the main chat about Mohammed Hijab and his buddy chatting about and, in inverted commas, criticizing or challenging or expanding upon Zakir Naik's claims about miracles in the Quran. So, as Stops has said, and if you go read some of the I only read in the first, this is part 2 that I've posted in there, but part 1, there were some very critical comments by fellow Muslims of the Hijab and his buddy criticizing this. They shouldn't do this. You know, Zakir Naik is this amazing dude, blah, blah, blah. So there's still this mentality of you shouldn't criticize because he's some kind of scholar. He's a knowledgeable guy. And
Brother makes a good point there.
Yes.
Anyway,
and of course,
I did part 1 and I'm doing part 2. It should be out. I'm hoping to get it done by Sunday.
But that's something that we could still talk about because, you know, again, this in a sense, it goes to this whole thing of, as you've quite rightly said, Stops, is that you've got some of these scholars that apparently are revered by their various followers. And again, it would be interesting. I don't know if Abu's got numbers or if you've got any information on who, let's say there are 1.7 billion Muslims, and let's say, I'm just taking a number, 1.2 billion of them are Sunnis. Do we have any idea who the main scholars are and who the most Sunnis follow? Do most Sunnis follow, or is it a split in numbers? How do we establish who are the main guys? Now, you could list 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of them, or maybe 10 of them, but how do we know how many people follow who? You know, is there some knowledge, or is this all just kind of hearsay and people, you know?
Okay, you have the 4 obvious ones, okay, which are linked to the madhabs, but other than that, everybody has their own personal private scholar. Then you have the scholars that are sort of mainstream, which one, Zakir Naik, Zindani, these guys. Then you have a couple of scholars which are known, which are normally from Al-Azhar. But other than that, it's a widespread. That's why you can find so many opinions by so many different scholars. So you only have 5 or 6 which everybody knows, but not everybody follows.
But doesn't that also then leave open that if you're a Muslim, and particularly if you're in the West, and you are more of a moderate Muslim, all you need to do is look for interpretations from different scholars that fit or are more closely aligned, in inverted commas, with Western values or the Western society, etc. Does that allow you to do that?
No.
And still, no.
No.
Okay.
So do you have to follow old values? You need to be this old Salafi thing, which is what Luther actually wanted. He was a Salafi. He wanted to go back to the roots. This is exactly what he's propagating. Funny enough. But the thing is that if you are a Muslim today, you are, okay, there is no such thing as a Muslim, the Islam, a Islam. This doesn't exist. It's all interpretation. This is the problem. So there is no consensus. Everybody has their own version.
When you say that, though, could we split up certain things in the sense of the following: that everybody that claims to use the label Muslim believes certain tenets. Muhammad is the last, well, not even this, but Muhammad is a messenger of God, not even the last.
Yeah, but that's it. There's only one God, Quran and Muhammad. That's it. Those are the 3. Sorry, there's 3. Those are the only 3 things. The rest is optional.
Right, I'm with you. Yeah. So anybody that claims to be a Muslim must believe those things. If they didn't believe one of those 3, nobody would consider them. Even us wouldn't even consider them Muslim. Never mind their own fellow Muslims. So there's those 3 foundational things, but then everything else is open to interpretation. So if you live in the Middle East and you follow Zakir Naik, then the Quran is a book of miracles. If you live over here and if you're a Muhammad Hijab who's a bit more careful, well, I say careful in inverted commas, who's not going to follow it to the fundamental level that Zakir Naik and his followers do, then you're going to reinterpret it in some other way. Would that be fair to say that you can? So you've got these 2, well, at least 2, but there's obviously, like you said, many different views on it. But you could have the Zakir Naik view, which is, hey, all of these scientific miracles are true, and here's my claims from science, which I misunderstand entirely, but I present them as if they're facts. And then you get the hijab and that view potentially on the other side, which is going, hang on a moment, we've got to be a bit careful with this. We don't want to claim that it's a scientist. It could be, but we're not. So we're going to kind of be fence sitters. We're going to dance a little bit on this because, hey, So science, and this was very clear in his video as well, science is not absolute. Somehow the Quran, they think, is absolute based on zero evidence, or even arguments for that matter. And so they're a bit more careful. And so they are less willing to commit, whereas Zakir Naik is willing to throw all his apples in one basket and go, hey, it is, and here's the thing. Done. And of course, once you do that, and you've got a lot of certainty, as he claims to have, although not a lot of knowledge on it, then that seems to appeal. Whereas the hijab version doesn't, I would suggest, doesn't appeal to the majority of Muslims. Because if you can have something with certainty and you go, hey, this is the way it is, I think that's what most people want. And there's just a battle now for whether that can happen.
Yeah, but Rob, what is the position of a hijab? He doesn't have one.
Well, that's why I say his position is more kind of a dancing one. But hey, yeah, we can say that that's one interpretation, but there could be many others. And the many other interpretations would just basically be reinterpreted no matter what science said. Hey, here's an interpretation that matches that. So the Quran isn't wrong. So he's the kind of guy that hedges his bets. Whereas Zakir Naik is all in with, the Quran says that the universe, that the Big Bang, the Quran, the Big Bang is in the Quran. Whereas hijab will go, hang on a moment, no. The Big Bang isn't in the Quran. That's one interpretation, but there could be others. It could be whatever. And so he's the fence sitter, whereas Zakir Naik's all in.
Yeah. Abu, what do you think? What is a Muslim?
A Muslim is someone that follows the religion of Islam. I'm looking at a comment. Stephen Green, Abdul Suleiman, Kafir means disbeliever. The closest word I heard to describe terrorist is Kharijite. If you want a word in Arabic, it's irhabi, which means terrorist. Kharijite is from the Khawarij, which is an old sect. We had an whole show about that. Who are the Khawarij? If you can go to the Jinn and Tonic Show channel and go back and listen to it. But the Khawarij it's an own kind of. Khawarij doesn't mean terrorist. Often, scholars will say that Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, they are Khawarij, and I explain why I don't think they are Khawarij in that video, although I used to think that they are. But Khawarij is an own sect with their own ideology, and the closest we have today is Ibadiyya in Oman, I think. So that's another thing.
The question stops us is, what is a Muslim? Have you got a definition, or what is your view on what a Muslim is?
Muslim comes from someone that is the doer of Islam, someone that is following the religion of Islam.
Okay, but what are the fundamental tenets? Stops mentioned 3. Do you agree with that? Do you have more or less?
And ashhada, to bear witness that there is no God worth worshipping but Allah, and that Muhammad is his prophet, and to pray 5 times a day, to pay the zakah, to make
5 pillars.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So any Muslim that doesn't follow those 5 pillars, if he followed 4 of the pillars, would he still be considered a Muslim? So he didn't pray 5 times a day.
There's different scholars. Most like Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal thought that if you don't pray, for example, if you only skip 1 prayer, then you're a kafir. But for example, Shafi'i thought that you're not necessarily a kafir if you don't pray. There is a little chance that you could be a Muslim.
Little chance? What does that mean? How can there be a little chance? I don't even know what that means. What is that, like up to God?
Because they believe that there is this metaphysical thing, iman, in your heart, and if you have like the weight of an mustard seed of iman in your heart, you're still a Muslim, and you won't spend an eternity in hellfire, although you're probably going to spend a long time in hellfire.
Okay, so but presumably God would know this.
Yeah, and then you have more extreme views, like even not paying zakah is kufr, because Abu Bakr made the Ridda wars, the apostate wars. Do you say that? What do you call the Ridda wars? against people because they refuse to pay zakah. So therefore, some scholars make the argument that not even paying zakah is kufr, because otherwise he wouldn't made war on them as ridda wars.
It's almost like if you're going to be a Muslim, you've got to pick a scholar. You've got to go through the line of scholars and go, okay, yeah, I like his views, and has he good arguments for his views, in my opinion, as a Muslim or somebody potentially being a Muslim, and go, okay, I'm going to follow whatever this dude says because this is the closest.
That's not correct. That's not correct.
But that's what they do.
No, but that's not correct, because the Prophet said, "Da' ma yaribuk ila ma la yaribuk." You should, how do you say in English? Like do away with that which, what's in English? Which gives you doubt. Yeah.
Yes, you are right. But in reality, in everyday life, this is exactly what young Muslims are doing. That's what they say. They follow Islam to the extent that they select a scholar who is closest to what they believe, and then they stick to this.
Yeah, a lot of people, if they're not sincere, they're doing it. But those who are sincere, trying to do like Martin Luther wanted, and he wanted to know, he wanted to come as close to the truth.
But if the texts are not clear, then how can you do that on your own? Because
but you do your best. You pray to Allah that He will guide you, and then you follow your conscience and try to get to the close. You try to look at the evidence with the help of the ulama and so on. But you do your best, the best that you can.
Okay, so can you do it on your own?
La yukallifu
So
Allah.
could you eye or stops without ever referring to a scholar?
No.
No, you can refer to scholars and so on. The best thing is you refer to hadith, but even like guys that, like for example, guys will refer to hadith and they say Sheikh Albani says this means this, so I follow Sheikh Albani in this. For example, Sheikh Albani is a late hadith scholar.
So the other things that I hear from Speaker's Corner, for example, is, hey, there are certain verses which are clear-cut, there are other verses which are unclear, and that's where we go to the scholars.
Well, ask them which one.
Yeah, but look,
okay, yeah.
there is this whole body of what you should do in every particular situation, and then there are small, like for example, should you go when you pray, should you go down with your hands first, or should you go down with your knees first when you go to sujood? So they look at the same hadith and come to different conclusions. So there you can just do your best. Like you can look at the hadith and follow your conscience as good as you can, and ask Allah for guidance. But most things are not like that. It's not like there's not any major ikhtilaf about whether you should pray or not pray, for example. Everybody knows that they should pray.
Yeah. I think so.
But there are, look, you have this thing. There are sentences which are clear and some which are or straight, and others which are more metaphorical. Then you have sentences which are intended for all time, and some are only based on what was happening at the time that they were revealed. Then you have a certain sequence of sentences which were revealed in that order, and then you have the sentences which were revealed in a haphazard way, which were then ordered and placed where they belong in a certain point in the Quran. And yet none of the Quran makes any sense because it doesn't have a structure. So there are so many claims around this thing that it's ridiculous. And the answer is nobody knows. But they still pretend that some of these are this, some of these are that. But as soon as you ask them, like 99 names of Allah, everybody will tell you Allah has 99 names. And you tell them, name them. And the funny thing is, the first 15, they all agree on. And then suddenly they diverge and they differ, and nobody really knows what the 99 names are.
Right.
Yeah, but that are minor things, I would say. It's not like This is also kind of the level of details.
Yes, but what I'm saying is there is nothing in Islam that is decisive. There is nothing that is 100%. They always talk about certainty, but there is no certainty in anything in Islam. This is the funny thing. It's
not if
hilarious when you hear this.
Not if you scrutinize it like we are scrutinizing it. I mean, we don't even believe that Mecca is the historical Mecca, but for most Muslims, there is a kind of consensus on like what is inside this.
I'll give them that. I'll give them that Mecca existed, that Muhammad existed, that Abu Bakr existed, that they had all these battles. That I don't care. I'll give them all that. But even then, it doesn't make sense because nobody really knows what's going on in Islam. Everybody has their own version, saying, "Well, I believe in this." I mean, look at this. What's this guy? I call him the Frog. He's always hanging out with the girls. He came up with a video where he says, well, it's obvious, very obvious, that in the Quran, it says you are not allowed to have anal sex. Excuse me, it does not. But
wait a minute. Are Pepe the Frog saying that you should not allow to have anal sex?
Exactly. So now people are saying, well, I think I agree with him. So I now follow, he must be a scholar because he's saying this, he's interpreting the Quran. Where somebody like Hijab says, no, you're not allowed to interpret the Quran because you really need to be a scholar. And this Mansour guy, this Frog guy, he is not a real scholar. So you have so many real problems within Islam because nobody agrees on any one thing. Well, okay, not even 5 prayers. People don't even agree on the 5 prayers. Some say it's 3, some say it's 5. So there is nothing that anyone agrees on.
Yeah. If you are...
yeah, but there's still, as I said, you have like the larger set of Islam, and in that set there contains a lot of ikhtilafats, but there's clearly things that are outside the set.
Well, tell me something that is 100% certain in Islam. It's only those things that you mentioned.
That you should not worship other gods than Allah.
Yeah, but hang on. What about? I mean, in the Quran you have 5 gods. So what do you do with those?
Yeah, but it clearly says that you should not worship any other god than.
Okay, but you should worship the Quran.
No. I'm saying that you should not worship any other god than God.
Well, in the Quran, it also says it is forbidden to not worship those. Now what?
Oh, okay, you mean that. But that is more kind of grammatical.
Okay, let's leave that apart. What about the 5 gods in the Quran? Are they part of the Quran or not?
Do you mean different names for Allah, or what do you mean?
No. There's 5 gods in the Quran, like Al-Uzza, Manat.
No, Al-Uzza, yeah, but it's clearly, the Quran clearly shows that you should not worship these things.
Okay, but they are in the Quran. So if the gods are in the Quran, you should still ignore the gods which are in the Quran.
Yeah, but there's a difference between ignoring that they are worshipped and saying that you should not worship them.
Okay, yeah, I'll agree with you. So,
but that is extremely basic.
That everybody agrees on. There's only one God. You only need to worship one. Does everybody believe Muhammad? Yes, everybody believes Muhammad. Everybody believes Quran. I think those are the only things that everybody has in common.
Yeah, I mean, you can always find these kind of weirdos that, like, we showed a guy that didn't believe that Mecca is the real Mecca and so on. But these are like...
No, I'm discounting those.
Yeah, we have to discount some people. But if you say like Sunni Islam and you say like...
Well,
99% of Sunni Islam.
You can't say Sunni. You can't you can't say the Sunnis, Sufis, they're not Muslims. I always count Ahmadiyas as well.
Yeah, but okay, but if you have long time to like you can put different things into different sets, and then you can make a set theory of what is a Muslim and not. It takes a long time, but you can do it.
Okay, but I think the point that we are all making is there is not a lot that Islam has that is 100% certain. There is a lot that is down to interpretation, and it is down to the individual scholars. And I think this is what makes it so difficult to reform Islam, because those things that you have there, those cannot be moved without destroying Islam from the inside. And I think this is
that is paradoxically great, because when Luther made his reform, at least, well, I'm not sure the gospel is that clear either, but
no.
But
the point is, it was what Luther did was a different kind of reformation. You could not duplicate that in Islam. This, I think, is the point that we all agree on.
Yeah, that I agree on.
So now that we've done that, we've put a tick behind that, the next question is, what kind of a reformation can you do? What would be on the top of your wish list for the reformation or changing, or I don't know, Islam 2.0 or whatever, that you would like to see first of all?
First step, you mean?
No, the one item, the one concept, the one thing that you would like to see changed in Islam.
I mean, look, I'm not among the Reformation crowd. I'm not.
Okay, because for me it would be 100% the only thing that I want to see in Islam is that people, the concept of truth, that you go and acknowledge reality. That's the only thing that I would like to see in Islam.
The thing is, they already think they have truth, though, don't you think?
Well, no, it's not verifiable. This is the problem. They say they do, but as soon as you ask them, gone.
I suppose for me then, based on what you've just said, it would be critical thinking. If there was one thing, I would want every Muslim to stop being a Muslim, in the sense of like evaluating their own worldview. Pretend they're a Christian, pretend they're a Hindu, or pretend ideally that they're a non-believer, and now try and start from that position and see whether you can come up with good reasons to believe from being external. Now, that's not easy for most people, but that would be the one thing I would do, start them by doing that.
My reformation is go back, like screw back the clock to before Islam, become pagans again. That is my reformation.
At least it was more fun.
It was more fun and way better.
Or teach, not just, I mean, I'm quite happy to teach my children about religion, teach them the main religions and non-religion, and see which of those are most reasonable and logical and so on, and help them to think critically. I think that's the main thing. Because I notice that most people can do that on occasions, but they very seldom do it on their own worldview. And Muslims are particularly bad at that. I mean, Christians are pretty much the same, but Muslims are even more or less critical of themselves. And they're very easy to just pick up some buzzwords they've heard or whatever the case may be. But even the apologists, which, you know, one would think have looked into it a lot more, are just so uncritical. And things like, you know, the miracle, you know, numeric miracles of the Quran. I'm going, holy crap, this is like the scientific miracles. And this is almost like the last thing you would ever believe. It's one of the worst things possible. And yet they, paradoxically, think it's one of the best things. And it's like, but they would reject anything that the Bible had. So if you came up with the same thing as all the Bible, and we did that, didn't we, on the last week or whenever it was, brought that up, they'd reject that. They'd have something to say about that. And so, yeah, it's just a case of critical thinking just evaporates when it's their own worldview. It's all about, it has to, you know, it has to be right, or it is already right. Now we can only find things that will cement or confirm our view. We will reject anything else to try and falsify our view. I think that would be a nice way to put it. Go out there as a Muslim and falsify your position. If you could do that, or if you can attempt to do that, and you can find the strongest argument or the strongest reason, argument, evidence that falsifies your position, that would be a good thing to do. Again, what is that though, I guess? How do they determine that? Because from what you guys tell me in your travels in the Middle East and so on, just critical thinking and so forth is just not something that most people do in any stretch. Although I'm, occasionally feel a sense of hope when I've spoken to occasionally, as I say, I've mentioned before, one or two people came from Saudi Arabia, said to me, Rob, the young people in Saudi Arabia, some of the young people, they can't speak for everybody, are starting to look at this. They're looking at the internet. They are in whatever way they're able to and permitted and can and bend the rules, pushing back against or trying to get around, the strict interpretations of Islam. So they're looking at other things.
That's my observation as well. Yep.
Yeah.
Totally.
And that's why I say critical thinking, the internet, curiosity, these are the enemies of Islam or religion in general, because they won't be silenced. It's like, the indomitable curiosity of man or woman, whatever the case is. Now you have access to information. If you could just learn to think critically, then, that's a tremendous benefit, and also an enemy of, these things, because once you start to do that, they're not as solid as they at first appear. But if you're listening in, if you're not particularly learned on any of these things, and I don't claim to be, but if you're listening in as a Muslim in particular, and you hear somebody, let's say an apologist in Speaker's Corner, and you're wandering around, you go, holy crap, this guy just wiped the floor with everybody else. He's just brilliant. Because, they've got a tactic of sounding very certain, and Zakir Naik is another example. He stands up there, boom, 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 he can quote a verse off, and then he opens his mouth, he starts talking about science. And those of us have looked into just some of the scientific claims. It's just like a partition in the brain. He can remember the Quran, great, wonderful. But the people in the audience go, well, if he understands the Quran, and maybe they have a few of them have got their Qurans out, and they're reading the verse that he's just quoted them, and go, my goodness, he's quoted that perfectly. He could do that out of the top of his head. And so they automatically assume the next thing that comes out of his mouth must be true as well. And it's that sort of thing that I think, is the challenge for a lot of people out there, is when somebody sounds certain, and in fact they make an accurate claim, or they say something that is in fact true, then people will assume that whatever they say is true, and that's problematic. So we're looking forward to other video stops. Yeah, obviously once you have finished it, it'll pop up. Can you put that channel again in the chat for everybody else? Obviously it'd be nice for you to get some more subscribers anyway. But put is it Speaker's Corner Analyzed channel, or which channel is it?
No, this one is going on the Quran Claims Reality channel.
Okay, if you can post that in there. I might not be subscribed to that one, actually. I'm obviously the Speaker's Corner Analyzed, I think, is the one I am. It could be that I'm on the other one as well. But I don't know if I saw your part one of the hijab thing. I think I did, actually. I think I did.
Well, on this one, I'm actually I made a video with my wife where I actually took a turban and put it around a flat earth.
You put a turban around a flat earth. What did you use for a flat earth? And why did you do that?
It's what you would call it, one of these bistro tables.
Oh, right. And so you sort of just curled it up, almost like so that it was a turban, as if it was on somebody's head.
No, so I just put a turban around it, once horizontally and once vertically, to show that you can put a turban around a flat earth. And then I put a little figurine on there. I took a light and then went up along the table to show that you can have a gradual sunrise just as you can around a normal sphere.
Oh, yeah. And it also depends how the sun moves, doesn't it? So you could move the sun round the circumference. You could go just over the top around the diameter in various ways. I mean, there's many ways.
Exactly, that's what I did.
Yeah.
But I did this now graphically in a video. So if anybody wants to grab it, go ahead. Because I see this claim so many times that a turban must be wound around something spherical. Well, I did the opposite.
Again, post it in the main chat if you can, or post it in this chat, and I'll post in the main one.
I'll put it in the. I've just.
There we go.
I put the channel into the chat.
There we go. If you're a viewer or somebody in the chat, or you watch this after the show's finished, have a look there at around 2 hours and 2 minutes. You will see a link there from Stop Spamming for one of his other channels.
Yeah, but this
goes into some of these. Oh, does it? Yes, that's true. So the name of the channel again is?
I just closed it. It's Quran Claims Reality.
Okay, so if you're interested in some of these videos, type into the YouTube chat then Quran Claims Reality. And
there's not a lot there yet. It's all about bouquet, it's about Haman, it's about all these claims about what bouquetism is, and some of these miracle claims.
Okay. Cool. I'm just doing something here for a moment. Be right back.
He's whistling again.
Sorry.
He's bored.
He's whistling or chewing gum.
I told you, check Dr. Mohammed Sharoor. Who is Sharoor? Abd Suleiman. I don't believe for a minute that you're a Muslim.
Why don't you?
There are too many inconsistencies.
About the wife beating misinterpretation.
Yeah.
Yep. So beating obviously means using a feather and lightly touching somebody. You can try that. All we need is the dictionary for that one, and you're up the creek without a paddle. Beating, and again, we've done this before, haven't we? Anyway, just go to the dictionary, and all we need is a dictionary. You can bring me 100 scholars, and they can have 15 million interpretations. I just bring you the English dictionary if you're going to claim the word beating.
By the way, if you want to check this, there's an excellent site out there, which is actually a Muslim apologist site, which is Quranix with the IX at the end. And this gives you a one-to-one translation of what the words mean, and it gives you a reference to Lane's lexicon if you want to know.
Okay, so that's a good one to have. There we go, Quran IX. And that goes through every single one. And obviously each of the words there as well gets highlighted as well. And with the various interpretations there. A reformist translation, a monotheistic translation, the message of the Quran, the final testament, Quran as it explains itself. It
also has this, is it, here we go, the Halim one, which is the apologist Quran translation.
Yeah, obviously we chat about this such a lot, but the ineptitude of this God to be able to send a clear message to all humans supposedly on this planet is just breathtaking.
What is the first sentence in the Quran? Muslims can't answer it.
Well, I don't know if this is supposed to be the first sentence. In the name of God, the gracious, the compassionate.
Well, is it really the first sentence in the Quran?
I don't know. I'm just reading what 1:1 is here in
Because
Quran
the Al-Fatiha, the opening, how can that be? The Quran is supposed to have been dictated by a God. Now, say the first sentence in 1:1 and tell me how a God can dictate this.
Okay. Choose any one of them. In the name of God, in the name of God, gracious and compassionate. It's almost like he's talking about himself in the third person.
How is that possible? Go to the second one, the third one. There's only 7 sentences. None of them make sense if you say them as, I am dictating this.
Praises to God, Lord of the worlds. Yeah, so this is almost like a prayer, isn't it? It's like a prayer that somebody else is saying. It's not God dictating directly to Muhammad, or maybe what they could do, I'll just play devil's advocate, tell me why this isn't the case. They could claim that, hey, this is Gabriel telling Muhammad what he should do, and this is the most important thing.
Yeah, but
so Gabriel is saying to Muhammad,
Gabriel is not making up the Quran.
Yeah, but what could have happened is Gabriel has been told by Allah to say to Muhammad, hey, Muhammad, this is what you need to do first. This is not the Quran in the sense of like, this is what you need to, this is not the truth of the Quran in that sense, but this is the prayer. This is the thing you need to do before I start telling you more information.
Exactly.
You need to do X, Y, and Z.
Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, tell me, the Quran is guidance. Now go to the first sentence in the Quran proper, which is in chapter number 2, sentence number 1. What is the first thing this God wants Muslims to know when it comes to guidance?
So 2.1 is ALM. A.L.M. Alif Lam Mim.
This is the first thing this God wants you to know when it comes to guidance.
Alif Lam Mim.
A1L30M. Here's it just for in case people think I'm just making stuff up here. Here is the first sentence of the second surah. So after we've done the prayer bit, then here's the next bit. This is the first sentence, which says, and I'm happy to say that in that sense, nobody seems to be able to translate, although there is a translation there. Alif Lam Mim.
No. Those are just the letters.
Okay, but there's somebody that's translating it in 3 words, like with dashes there.
No. But these are the letters written out.
Ah, okay. So this is the pronunciation of the letters written out, I'm guessing.
The transliteration.
Right. Okay. Okay. This is the book in which there is no doubt, a guide for the conscientious.
ألف لام ميم ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون أولئك على هدى من ربهم وأولئك هم المفلحون سواء. Okay.
Thank you.
So Abu, since you're obviously very fluent in Arabic, what does that first sentence of the second surah, what does that mean? What is there, does anybody understand that?
Has anybody even tried to translate
that? Or is it just a thing of we don't know what that means?
We don't know what it is. It's just letters. It's like saying ALM.
Yeah. But why is that there? Has anybody ventured an opinion as to why those 3 letters are there?
The only one who did this is Rashid Khalifa.
There is long, like.
What did he say?
That's a long story. We can almost devote a whole show yesterday.
You want to? Okay, let's do that one. Let's do that then. If you think it's that long, because like you say, this is important stuff in the sense that if you're a Muslim and you believe that every word in the Quran is dictated from God, then what does this mean? Or is it a case of, and again we can talk about it, is it a case of like we just haven't got the meaning yet? God in his wisdom it will come to our understanding at some point in the future.
No, there's 29 of these.
Oh, okay.
I mean, my favorite sentence in the Quran is 41:1.
All right, let's just bring that up.
It's a prediction. Only prediction in the Quran that has ever come true.
HM.
Yes.
What is that prediction?
H&M.
Right, in the shop or Her Majesty or
it's the clothes shop.
All right, let's do a show. How many are there? 29.
Yeah.
What is their name for them? What do Muslims typically call these?
Single letter verses.
Okay, good. Next week we'll talk about the single letter. Let's leave it for now. There we go. We'll talk about the single letter verses.
Okay, if anybody wants to know, I've done an entire video on this.
Because I've not looked at it before, but I'm going to be, and it won't be hard. I'm asking you questions and trying to play devil's advocate in my ignorance here, as genuine as I can be, and you can just answer me, because obviously I would want to come on. So if you're a Muslim and you want to come on and explain what these single letter, did you say single letter, and what they're supposed to mean, feel free to join us or get anybody to join in and
American love machine, yeah.
Would be as fascinated as I would.
Amphibian lover magnet. Oh, this is excellent. I didn't know that
people are making up
would be such fun.
People are making up words for it. Isn't this funny, isn't it? But it goes to like the psychological, because psychology was a part, and I'm going to be very, because I don't have qualification in the sense of like a certificate, or I'm not a PhD in psychology, because that's a wide field. More on the, I won't even say the clinical version, but more on the coaching, the more modern version of what could be construed as psychology. So I'm interested in the there we go. I'm interested in the psychological process behind trying to work something out. Instead of going, hey, we don't know, which is possibly what they say, there is the psychological mentality here of, we've got to make this fit. It's got to be worked out. We've got to find an answer. There's got to be something. Instead of going, method, or any of us would be going, hey, we don't know. That's good. It may mean nothing. It may have been a mistake, like somebody burping, or I don't know, farting, or something happening, and then there was translated to these letters. Maybe it was an echo in the cave. Somehow Muhammad mistook the echo for these letters, or whatever the case is.
No, you can.
Okay, now keep it for next time. Keep it for next time. Let's not. We'll do a whole show on this next time then. We've got lots to share here, and I will ask you these questions, and we can do that. That sounds good. Abu, have you got a hadith of the day? Unless anybody else has got anything they want to add.
I realized that we missed an important thing here. We were talking about Martin Luther, and that is his anti-Semite things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We will just quickly quote some things. Quote Martin Luther: first, to set fire to their synagogues or schools. This is to be done in honor of our Lord and our Christendom, so that God might see that we are Christians. Second, I advise that their houses also be razed and destroyed. Third, I advise that all their prayer books and Talmudic writings in which such idolatry, lies, cursing, and blasphemy are taught and be taken from them. Fourth, I advise that the rabbis be forbidden to each henceforth on pain of loss of life and limb. Okay, we don't have to say all the things, but he was kind of an anti-Semitic dude. So I thought we can say...
a fairly unpleasant guy, yeah. So,
just like Newton was.
To summarize before you go there, Abu, so is the consensus view here that any sort of reformation or enlightenment in the way that happened with Christianity, whether or not, is very unlikely to happen in the same way with Islam as we understand it?
I'm not sure I understood. Well,
let me just say it again then. Do we think that there's any way that Islam can reform in the same way that Christianity did?
No.
Okay. Cool. I will hand it over to you for the hadith of the day.
Abu Hurairah, may Allah be pleased with him, said, the Messenger of Allah said, the last hour will not come until the Muslims fight against the Jews, until a Jew will hide himself behind a stone or a tree, and the stone or the tree will say, O Muslim, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. But what is it called?
Gharqad.
What is the name in Arabic? Al-Gharqad or something like that. Tree will not say so, for it is the tree of the Jews.
There you go.
So, okay, let's just have a quick chat about this, because I've heard this so many times from, and the basic response I normally get from people is, hey, this verse is very specific for a very specific time and very specific people, and there's a reason for it, which is, now I'm not sure whether, this part I'm not entirely sure whether this is, if I'm remembering this a little bit correctly, which is that the Jews those specific Jews, it was that sort of was it the battle where they were traitorous towards Muhammad. So it only refers to Jews that were traitorous, and therefore you need to go seek out all of those that betrayed or were treacherous to Muhammad at that particular time, that one time in history, and that's all it refers to. What are your thoughts?
I mean, it's better if you want to know that, we can go and look at like Fath al-Bari or something like that and see exactly what the scholar says about this, because it's better than it's better that I read from a real book from a scholar that everybody think is good.
I mean, you can do, yeah. Start in the meantime while everybody's doing that.
No, I don't have any.
Oh, okay.
Maybe I have, but
what's your view there? I mean, you've probably heard that zillions of times.
I've heard the same thing.
Oh, okay, right.
It's specific to a situation because the Jews were misbehaved, and this was a battle, and this was justified because most Muslims are better than their God, so they try and justify these things.
What would be your response to somebody who said that to you, though?
Well, is there any value? Okay, Muhammad is supposed to be the role model for today. Now, this goes back to Muhammad. Why would Muhammad tell me something today that is relevant only for 1 millisecond in the history of time? Like, I don't know, 1,000 years ago. Why would anybody want me to believe that it is relevant to put into a collection of sayings of somebody who is trying to give me a message about something that I need to do, that I actively need to do, while putting me off what I am supposed to be doing? It doesn't make sense. Because somebody who tells me that you should keep slaves, you should rape, you should kill, you should torture, you could do all these things, it doesn't matter what they are related to. It's off-putting. So why would somebody put this into a propaganda paper?
Okay, so I mean, just again, they'll say, well, it just showed that Muhammad was, he was a very righteous man in the sense, in the sense that you should only go and kill these Jews because they were treacherous and they would have otherwise killed or in some way betrayed him. So this hadith is a very good thing from a Muslim point of view, because it shows that it was only in this particular time, and this was a dire reason, and therefore Muhammad was okay with finding and slaughtering these Jews. Otherwise, he himself or his followers might have been slaughtered. So this goes towards more of his majesty, and therefore it's a good thing.
Okay, so is this really the best option that was available? And is this something that you want to propagate today as being positive for Islam and positive for being a role model for today in the 21st century?
Okay, so what somebody could say, again, just as a devil's advocate, is say, well, no, it's not propagated for today, but so it's a historical point that happened in that time, and it's there for that time. But again, what the bigger message to take away from this as a Muslim or as a critic or as somebody looking at this is that it's there to show the integrity and the moral fiber of Muhammad, that's what happened, because we don't want to airbrush out anything. We want to keep all of those in. And so what we really want to do is show all of Muhammad, and here's what he said, and this is what he did. And would you agree, Stops, or would you agree, Abu, or would you agree, non-Muslims, that is an acceptable thing to do at that time for that particular situation?
No, he could have changed it. This is the whole point. If Muhammad was really such a good guy, he could have changed all that. He could have changed slavery. He could have changed this.
No, but we're not talking about all of the slavery. We're talking specifically about that hadith. Though,
but he didn't change it. He was a person who at the time reacted exactly like somebody at the time would have reacted. He is not somebody who reacted at the time as somebody who was coming to bring a revolution, somebody to bring betterment for mankind. He reacted exactly the same way as everybody else would have reacted, and that is take out the sword and kill everybody. And that's it. But obviously, what is the benefit of that?
Well, a Muslim would potentially argue with you, and I'm obviously not the best, devil's advocate. Well, I do what I can, and in the following sense, the Muslim would say to you, hang on, the slavery, all those other things, we can debate that. That's a separate point. What we're talking about here is that hadith and going to kill the Jews behind the stone and the tree and all that sort of stuff. And on that particular hadith, that goes to show that Muhammad was a man of moral character, fiber. It's somebody that Muslims should follow. because slaughtering the Jews at that particular time and at that moment would be the moral thing to do, even today, even though we wouldn't tell you to do that. But that shows his moral fiber at that time, because they were treacherous and they would have otherwise killed him. Say to you, what would you do in that situation if you were either attacked or you were betrayed by these Jews? And so at that time, that was the best thing to do. And so put aside the slavery, because we could talk about slavery and all the other things, but here we're just talking about that particular incident that Muhammad did. Do you as a person stops today agree that that was a moral thing for Muhammad to do?
Nope, that doesn't cut the mustard with me. Because we need to look at the context as well. We have an all-powerful God who selected a person who is now having to defend himself against these violent Jews, and all he can do is to kill every single one of them. So the all-powerful God allows the Jews to be stronger than Muhammad, and he has to go and defend himself, and the only option he has is to kill everyone.
Well, hang on a moment. A Muslim would say to you, but they weren't stronger, because obviously Muhammad found out about the treachery, was able to overcome that, and the way he overcome it was by killing his enemies, which is a justified act in a, quote, sense of war. Because this was...
No, it's not justified. That's exactly what I'm saying. It is not justified to kill other people. Because...
but if they were going to kill or betray you, is that not justified to kill? And of course, the response would be to defend yourself. So this is a defensive act. So when he's saying go out and kill them, he's not saying go out and kill every Jew in the entire world. He's going out and saying, presumably, go and kill those Jews that were part of this conspiracy to betray me and to kill me and my followers. That's the only people I want you to go and kill, because it's a defensive act.
Okay, I'm just taking everything that you are saying and just granting it, okay, that these Jews were really bad.
Yeah.
And I'm saying it cannot be that the only option available to the best person, the best human on this entire planet, who is backed by the most powerful God in the entire history of humankind, has only one option available to him, and that is to kill them. I'm sorry, this is the way that I see it.
No, that's fair enough. And so what would be your response then if a Muslim said to you, okay, if you were Muhammad stops, or what would you say? Forgetting they might try and go down the route of, oh, well, what morality have you got, blah, blah, blah. But let's assume that they didn't go that route and they just said to you, okay, what would you do then? If you think Muhammad was not good, what would be a better moral act than what Muhammad did to these people who were going to kill him, betray him, whatever? He was just defending himself.
Okay, this is the same thing as I would tell everybody or anyone today, that if you look at the situation between Hamas, for example, and Israel, where Hamas is chucking rockets into Israel all the time, I'm saying, no, Israel, don't go and clobber them. Don't go.
Abu listening there. Shall I mute Abu if he's whistling?
Sorry.
Shoot some gun, Abu.
Hamas is chucking rockets into Israel all the time, and I wouldn't go and tell the Israelis, okay, go and clobber the Hamas, don't clobber all the people living in the Gaza Strip at the moment. No, see if you can arrange something with them that you don't restrict them so much and they don't chuck rockets. So I would always go for negotiation, always go for diplomatic channels before I would go and do what this asshole Trump does, and immediately go and just immediately threaten them with violence and annihilation and everything that he does. So yeah, okay. So I'm very much a pacifist in this sense.
Okay, but hang on a moment. All you're doing really then, if a Muslim apologist was on here, and again, I'm not the best, but I just do what I've listened to for people saying, all you're doing is you're kicking it back one step. In the sense you're saying, okay, let's do that. But the Muslim apologist would say to you, okay, but it could be, and it may or may not be in the hadith, so we may have to assume this or whatever the case is, or it could just be hypothetical, whichever. They go, okay, stops, fine. Let's say that, but then these Jews had either shown that they were not open to negotiation or that had been tried before, whatever the case is. What now? Now you've been that route and that hasn't worked. What now?
Yeah. I understand.
You're justified now to defend yourself by going out and rooting out and finding just these particular Muslims, Jews, who were going to be treacherous and kill me and my tribe.
Yeah, but now it's saying that even if the Jew runs away, you should still kill him.
Where does it say that?
Oh, yes. Is it the one before?
Okay, but even that could be justified, though. But even that could be justified in the sense, I'm I'm just doing it from the Muslims' point of view. That can be justified, because if that guy runs away, he goes and gets himself another army, he colludes with other people, he comes back and slaughters the tribe. And so, again, the question, all it happens that I'm hearing, again, just you and I having this as a...
Yeah. Okay. If you push it to that point, then at some stage I have to concede and say, yes, you are allowed to defend yourself. If it goes to that point, but it takes a lot of persuasion before I will go and concede this. And the second thing is, none of this is true. It is not true that the Jews kept on attacking the Muslims and Muhammad and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so those are different things. So
yes,
number one, yes, I would defend myself. Absolutely. I mean, come on, if somebody goes and attacks my family and he puts a knife at their throat, I will, with the greatest of pleasure, put a bullet right between their eyes. Absolutely, I will do that.
Okay, so you're not really a
pacifist to a certain extent. Yes, at some stage, I will say no.
Okay, so again, if we use the Hamas example, for example, I would probably be not quite as much of a pacifist as you, in the sense that I would root out and eliminate Hamas. I would do absolutely everything I could to avoid civilian casualties, and ideally rockets, or, unless the strike was surgically pinpointed, I think the Israelis have probably got better undercover and other ways that they could root out these Hamas people.
This is the problem. You know that even 20 years ago, I said I would love to be a marketing manager for Israel, because they are so clumsy at their marketing. They are so clumsy at making things stick, because they go quiet, 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 boof. Instead of going and saying, listen, we have a message here. There's something we want to share with you. You tell us how you would react, exactly what you are doing now. I would go and recommend Israel they do, because they say nothing, and then suddenly they send planes and they say, yeah, but they attacked us. That's not the way to do it. This is exactly what you are doing now. This is what needs to happen. That you stage it, you increase it, you go. I mean, these are the political games that you play in a company nowadays. If you have a department that simply does not want to work with you, you go step by step by step, and you make it visible. You increase visibility that there are other people that are not capable of working together with them, and then you climb down on them. But
it could be that Israel is doing this, but it's not coming through to us, or the media is not picking up, or whatever the case is.
Extremely clumsy.
I mean, they're not stupid people, generally speaking. So
they're
pretty smart people.
But they're terrible in marketing.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, there would be a point, and I think where I would agree with you is i.e., the Muslim apologists would have to show that all of the things that you objected to were in fact true, in the sense that, yes, that they were going to escape, they were going to do this, they had done this before, whatever the case is. They would have to show that, in fact, it's almost like Muhammad had no choice but to root out and kill every single one of these supposedly, and they may well have been, so I'm just saying supposedly, just in the conversation, supposedly treacherous Jews. So let's say there were 500 of them, or whatever the case is. They would have to show that was the only option to defend himself. There's no other way that he could have done it. Were some of the, did he know for a fact that all of these Jews were in cahoots with each other and wanted to overthrow him or decimate him and his cohorts, etc.? So, yes, you're quite right, and I would agree as well that at a certain point, if in fact all the conditions are met, then your existence would be justified by taking the life or destroying of your enemy. But they would have to show that was, like you say,
correct.
It was to that point where there was no other option. It's the same thing that, as we hear many times with the slavery thing. Do you know what? Oh, well, if you defeat all the men in battle, what about those poor women? It's like if you left them, they would just die on the spot. This is the sort of response I hear. So the humane thing to do is, of course, take them as a slave. But hang on a moment, you non-Muslims, slavery isn't what you think. It's like they're your best friends, except that you own them. And that's my objective. You clothe them, they eat at your same table. And why not call them your friends or your buddies or whatever the case is? But owning another human being is just, and they do this dance around as if women are completely incapable of taking care of themselves. If their men were all decimated and their tents and everything were left, they could carry on living. It's not like they would die on the spot. Yeah. I give women a lot more credit that they are self-sufficient and able to survive than clearly Muslims seem to do. Or maybe that's just the rhetoric.
helpless people who are wandering
Yes.
around knowing what to do. Exactly.
Yeah, the men are everything to them. The moment all the men are
Exactly.
killed, the only humane option is, well, hey, we got to take them as slaves. And when I point out, you know, you could take them as prisoners, well, we didn't have, this is the response I get, well, we didn't have prisons. There were no prisons. We couldn't do that. That's too logistically challenging. So we'll take them as slaves instead. I mean, this is the sort of thing I hear. By the way, just a comment in the, which you'll love, I'm sure, Stops and Abu, a comment in the chat there. Our Muslim, one of our Muslim chat people is basically saying, Muhammad, well, he says he came to end slavery.
Yeah, of course.
And this, of course, is an apologetic that I've heard before.
I don't even go there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you know, my response is, well, in fact, if Muhammad came there to end slavery and he had an all-powerful God on his side, all he needs to do is say, slavery is forbidden. I have Almighty Allah on my side. You stop slavery now, or you face the dire consequences.
Yeah, and he protected all homosexuals, I know.
Yes, yeah. And the response, of course, is, no, he wasn't powerful enough to do it. But, of course, he's powerful enough when he's outnumbered and he gets the angels to come and help him. But when it's a fairly big thing about slavery, he's now not powerful because everybody else was doing it, and you can't just rule it out straight away, because now you would have people attacking him, it would be anarchy, etc. So he's got to do it slowly, and it's got to be over a period of time. The problem is, of course, as you've and Abu and others have pointed out, that, quote, slow process didn't stop until the 1900s, and then it was forced on them by some of the Western colonial powers. So it was an extremely slow process, as in, like, you know, a millennium after his death, and then not because they decided suddenly that the slavery should just be abolished outright. But again, you know, if he had all this power, or certainly had a powerful omnipotent being behind him telling him what to do, as Jesus did, or claimed to do, etc., you know, then he could have implemented any rule he wanted at any particular time. So you have to do better than say, well, you couldn't really do it immediately because there would have been anarchy. They would have fought him. Well, he had the angels apparently in some of his battles, so the angels were clearly available if he needed them at any particular time. So all he had to do was implement the supposed will of Allah at any time, instantly. Then you would have had my attention. Now man comes along, there's slavery, whatever. The moment he gets this message, he tells them no more slavery, slavery stopped, and all the historical records show slavery was abolished instantaneously. Now you're going, holy crap, here is something that is a moral virtue. Here comes a man, and maybe his other moral virtues weren't so good, but we could have potentially said, here's a moral virtue where a man came along and he abolished slavery. And literally all historical records show that the moment that he said this, slavery, everybody gives up slaves. Either out of fear or out of...
What did he abolish? Eating pork. The most important thing.
Yeah. So these are all the sort of things, you know, that make us...
Okay, is that it? Can I go and have another hops for stops?
Yes. All right, guys, I think that's the show. Thank you so much. So we'll do, next week, we'll do the one-letter verses that we can have a conversation around. This should be entertaining and educational for me, because I haven't gone into this anyway. You might have done it many times, Stops, but humor us if you would. So what's the title? What do we call it? The one-letter verses.
Single letter.
Single letter verses.
The miracle of the single letter verses.
Perfect. That's what it shall be next week. Thank you to Stops and to Abu, as always. Amazing. There's always something that I learn. I'm educated and entertained by here, so that's all good. Thank you to all of you in the chat, and for those of you who are viewing. And we will see you next Friday at 8 p.m. UK time. Check your timings, because obviously we have had a change in daylight saving here in the UK and Europe. So if you are in a country that doesn't have daylight saving, please check, and I will put the show up. I'll schedule the show now when this one finishes, so that you know exactly when it starts in your time zone. Thanks again, guys, and a good night to everybody, panelists and viewers and chat.
Cheers.